Hello all, this is the Owl, and at last, as promised, here is the full compiled version of the first act of Gantz, with only a small amount of fluff shaved off here and there. Before we start though, I just want to give a massive thanks to the recent influx of patrons. Our rent recently went voop again, and this, well, has helped us somehow squeak through. Anyways, for those of you that don't care about how the sausage is made, or how or why I'm structuring things as they are, feel free to skip ahead to the first numbered chapter and enjoy this ass-numbingly long video. I must say, I've really enjoyed reading all the different jobs you work that allow you to binge these surprising number of truck drivers out there. And yes, if you hear any weird noises in the background, that's our neighbors, and I hope they get sucked into Gantz. So, Gantz, at an official level, is a manga that is structured very strangely. It's divided into 3 phases, with phase 1 covering, honestly, most of the manga, phase 2 being a tiny little streak of weirdness between phases 1 and 3, and phase 3 covering the cuckoo final arc. Oh, we'll get to you eventually. Now, I do try to structure things in such a way where I can make these compilations, as people don't tend to like video chains. But there's no way I can do Gantz in its phases. Instead, well, I've always seen Gantz as a story in 3 acts. And thus, this is how I will be structuring it. Act 1 will cover the introduction segment, the first 3 hunts, and their intermissions, as well as the bit before Hunt 4, the latter serving as a decent epilogue to the brutality of Hunt 3, and also leading us neatly into the second act. Act 2 will cover everything up until the final arc, and Act 3 will be that insanity. Anyways, with that, welcome back to the always edgy, gory, booby, and frequently mingy world of Gantz. Enjoy your stay. It is a failing of us older folks, especially those of us heading through middle and towards old age, to forget what it was like to be a teenager, especially an older teenage boy. A lot of writers infamously struggle to write teenage characters for this reason. They either behave like adults or like children, except that teenagers aren't adults or children. They are very much their own thing. They have their own way of looking at and interacting with the world. For those of us at 40, walking down a city street in the rain at night alone is basically just ho-hum. But when you're 16, the cool air feels electric on your skin. You are conscious of the stars above, the reflections of neon in the puddles below, the smell of cooking drifting out of restaurants, and the distant thump of bass from a parked car. You feel weirdly but acutely lonely, and everything is somehow significant. It's a time when every sense is heightened and every experience is amped up. Every crush is a great romance, and every rejection a tragedy. Every triumph is the greatest victory of your life, and every failure an utter calamity. Yeah, being a teenager is both amazing and horrible, all at the same time. Now, there are tons and tons of manga that attempt to tackle what it's like to be a young man at that awkward age between being a kid and being all grown up. And while a lot of them are admittedly really good, very few capture that unique headspace all that well at all. Holy Land is one that does immediately come to mind, and maybe Great Teacher Onizuka. But out of this tiny number of series, it's probably Gantz that remains nearest and dearest to my calcified heart. Note, I didn't say the objective best, but I will say favorite. Seriously, if I ever finished that top 50 list, Gantz is probably going to be top 10. No, I'm not kidding. But why? You ask, do I like this often criticized, problematized, and memed manga so much? Well, that's going to take a while to explain. So for those of you who aren't a fan of long intros, I've hopefully got chapters working now. And even if I'm still boomering it, well, the time codes in the description should work. This is going to be a Leviathan video once it's all put together, so this intro will hopefully seem a bit less intrusive then. But Gantz really is a story that needs a long intro, because even covering it to the level of detail that I intend to is daunting, for a variety of reasons. I mean, first of all, where the hell do you even start with something like Gantz? A manga that somehow manages to be, at the same time, divisive, controversial, problematic, disturbing, uplifting, elating, contentious, edgy, juvenile, mature, insightful, stupid, bloody amazing, and just plain old bloody. And all at the same time, as well as managing to be emotionally devastating in places. Seriously, when this thing lands, it hits like a freight train full of sledgehammers. I am not kidding, or even slightly ashamed to say, this thing has moments that make me frigging cry whenever I read it. Well, I guess you start at the beginning. And with that, mangaka Hiroya Oku is an industry veteran and also something of a cipher. Fukuoka born, and from my understanding, a long-time Tokyoite. He made a big splash with his first successful manga, Hen, which, yeah, we do not have the time to talk about Hen today, except for saying that I can understand why it was extremely controversial in socially conservative 80s and early 90s Japan. He is better known today for the awesome and really trippy Inuyashiki, which is probably his most critically acclaimed work, despite it being completely and utterly bananas. Oku is a man that, much like his primary inspiration, Go Nagai, yes, that Go Nagai, loves to push boundaries and, well, more than loves, believes that it is essential for a piece of media to be considered worth reading. Although, you know, with how much Oku clearly loves to poke the bear, even now, it's hard to know how serious he is half the time. Oku is also someone that wears the things he enjoys on his sleeve and incorporates them into his stories. So, what does Oku like? Well, he likes technology, spaghetti westerns, video games, mecha, explosions, katanas, large breasts, surrealism, action movies, science fiction, horror movies, boobs, horror action movies, gore, big robots, violence, asses, violent video games, tits, dinosaurs, butts, body horror, guns, hot chicks, motorbikes, sword fights, enormous mammary glands, yakuza stories, vaginas, supermodels, naked women, leather suits, hot chicks, naked ladies, boobs, and you can probably see a theme emerging. This is a man who has been a 16-year-old boy since the 1970s and has never stopped, and I absolutely love him for it, as someone who has tastes that run in a, let's say, similar direction. However, Oku's best known work, and definitely his most prolific, has to be Gantz, and while it has been somewhat forgotten in the West, although apparently it's really popular in Spanish-speaking countries, does anyone know why? Let me know in the comments. Inspired by a combination of the Western movies Oku liked, such as The Matrix, Die Hard, Men in Black, and Tomb Raider, as well as Japanese reality TV and classic Japanese B and Z flicks of yesteryear, it's quite something to behold. Slightly older Future Owl dropping in to when this was recorded first, but Mrs. Owl literally just informed me that one of the core inspirations of Gantz is, allegedly, frigging Immortality Inc., the classic science fiction novel by Robert Sheckley, a story about a man who undergoes some kind of body transplant and wakes up in a distant and rather alien future. And if this sounds familiar, it's also the core inspiration behind Futurama, aka the best adult-oriented Western animated show that isn't Venture Brothers, as well as elements of Warren Ellis's mind-bogglingly good Transmetropolitan series. Anyway, it's also a manga that, while somewhat derided today as the best-worst manga of all time, was as important for the industry in its own right as things like Violence Jack, Devilman, or Dragon Ball. R.I.P. Toriyama, you are gone far too soon. Much as with the aforementioned manga, you can find Gantz's DNA in a whole bunch of stuff today, from power fantasy isekais, which it formalized many tropes of, to seinen action series, and that's before we get into its art and the use of technology, which we'll talk about in more detail later on. And yes, while Gantz absolutely has its flaws, to the point where I'm almost willing to call it endearingly scuffed, from an uneven and widely hated start, to some pacing issues, a bunch of plot threads that kind of go nowhere, and a final arc that, let's just say, remains divisive, it's still bloody amazing. At least if you're in the right headspace for it, or have a weakness for overly earnest storytelling. And, to this day, remains a cult staple, and it still gets spin-offs, including the really good Gantz E. However, as mentioned, when approaching making a video series on Gantz, well, it's sort of tricky, and not just because the bloody thing is almost 40 volumes long, extremely story and character dense, and at times amazingly ambiguous and confusing, especially towards the end. See, Gantz pushed boundaries hard in a post-Berserk seinen landscape. I've even heard it described as the manga that tried to out-Berserk Berserk, and yeah, I can see it. This manga is so extreme, so gory, so booby, and so perverted, occasionally stepping so close to the edge of, is this action horror or just weird porn territory, that this is going to be, without a doubt, my most censored video to date, even more than Vitiator's. Maybe half the battle sequence panels will either have to be omitted or heavily censored, and there are some sequences that I cannot show you. For instance, a lengthy fight with a huge monster made entirely out of, let's say, female naughty bits. Hell, there's one series, likely the most notorious in Gantz, that is so controversial and has aged so poorly that, to be frank, I probably can't even describe it in any great detail. Those who've read this thing know what I'm talking about, and just how much there is going to be to unpack there. And this brings me to point 2. Some folks have been asking me for a while now to include a more comprehensive list of triggers and warnings regarding the content of these videos, and okay, keep in mind I am an old man and not terribly used to that stuff, but it is something I have considered. See that bit in Satogashi that I know some people took issue with? I responded to the pinned comment there if you want to know why. So, as I do want to avoid spoilers, and I know that especially for Gantz, no warning I can give will be comprehensive enough for everyone, let me say this right now. Gantz is one hell of a manga, even by today's standards. It's not quite Uzigo White level, but it's not far off sometimes. If you have anything that you find personally upsetting enough to straight up nope out of a video, from bigotry to sexual assault to abuse, Gantz is not the manga for you, and even this video might cross some lines. So, while I would love to say just go and read it, please make sure that you have an extremely strong stomach and are in a good place mentally right now, because this is a manga that might rattle you. Point 3. Gantz is clearly a Frankenstein's monster in many respects, of a lot of different media. The amount of pop culture nods are bananas, and I will simply never manage to list them all, let alone explain them all. So if I do miss one that you notice, please post it in the comments. It'll be great fun seeing what you come up with. And who knows, I might work out some kind of reward for the best one. Point number 4 is one that you likely won't care about, but it's the core reason why I have held off on this for a while. See, Gantz, like Berserk, was picked up a long time ago by Dark Horse, but unlike Berserk, they retained ownership, and well, Dark Horse doesn't really do digital releases. While they have released 2 different versions of the manga, the most recent being the very high quality omnibus editions that I own, along with Once Upon a Time the original Japanese volumes, there is, to my knowledge, no digital release of this thing, and ahem, even unofficially, of the latter half of this thing outside of fanlations. So we'll get there when we get there, but if you're watching the full compiled video in, I guess, 2025, hello future you! And if the quality and style seem to get weird about halfway through, this is why. Dark Horse also do have a tendency to trans things into English differently, in that they will replace Japanese cultural phenomena with Western ones, much like the Phoenix Wright games did with ramen and burgers. I'll point this out where I can. Point number 5. Unlike the manga landscape of today, turn of the millennium Japan was a bit different, and as far as Western readership of manga goes, the subculture was microscopic even in Japan, and Oku isn't a mangaka known for explaining a whole lot. And this has all led to the manga not only being a bit confusing in places, but also the reader needing to infer their own understanding of how stuff works within the world, or even what stuff is called. And this has, over the past, bloody hell, 25 years almost, damn it I'm old, led to a lot of different headcanons forming on discussion boards and forums. And yes, some of these will be pretty personal due to me reading and talking about this with a small group of foreigners in Japan way back in 2004, if I recall. For instance, this will always be called an H-gun to me, and these will always be called coil suits, even though I know the former is technically incorrect, and the latter is due to a superficial connection with an unrelated and obscure video game series. And no, don't even mention the Gantz manuals. I read the first one a while back and it lost me when it started contradicting the manga itself and calling a rifle a shotgun. So if you're some kind of Gantz purist, please take everything I say here with a fair bit of charity. Point 6. Gantz is a bit of an odd duck, structurally speaking. I was initially going to break this series up into volumes, but Gantz does not divide neatly into volumes. Then I was going to do arcs, but it also doesn't break down well into arcs. At least not until quite a bit later on, and this is going to be a very long series. So, as Gantz does follow a formula to some degree of reliability in terms of the fact that after the prologue, it sort of goes for a mission into mission, mission into mission style, I will likely split these videos into missions or hunts, a term that both the fandom and Oku himself seems to prefer, and one intermission segment, at least until we reach the final arc. And this brings me finally to point number 7. Gantz is, in and of itself, enormous. The biggest manga I've attempted by maybe a factor of 4. This means that not only will I not be covering every single beat of every single fight, every relationship, or every funny moment, or what have you, I will also be ignoring all the stuff added later on. So again, no Gantz manuals, no Gantz sequels, no spin-offs, no anime, no movies. I will, however, be going fairly deep into Japanese cultural nods, as Gantz is just such a perfect, well, I would have to say period piece of turn of the millennium urban Japan that I would be terribly remiss not to. Whew. And with that absolute bastard of an intro segment taken care of, let's get into the meat and potatoes here. Today, we begin our journey into Gantz. I hope you enjoy your stay. Right off the bat, let me say this much. Gantz does not start especially strong. The first, let's not say arc, as again this is a difficult term to use for this manga, but at least the first hunt or mission, as well as the entire prologue, is pretty widely regarded to be at best flawed, and at worst incredibly focused on being edgy, gross, horny and shocking, as well as just bad. However, I'm not quite that down on it, but I will admit that it does take up until Hunt 3 to really get good, and Hunt 5 is where the manga hits its stride. Anyways, we open by meeting our main character, Kei Kurono, a salty little douchebag of a 15-year-old. He's smug, apathetic, resentful, and solipsistic in a way that, yeah, is very common of teenagers, especially teenagers of that era. I want you to keep this in mind as we go through. Kei is one of my favorite manga protagonists of all time, but starting out, it's going to be really hard to understand why. For now, just keep in mind that, well, he's a 15-year-old boy in the year 2000, because Oku does do a really fantastic job of drilling down into that headspace. He's reading a girly mag on the subway when an old lady approaches him asking for help navigating the rails, and he basically blows her off with a sneer. And right off the bat, there is so much to talk about here. See, Gantz, as mentioned, was published at the turn of the millennium in Japan, and it is a perfect snapshot, not only of what life was like back then, naturally amped up to 12, this is an Oku manga of course, but of the attitudes people had. What do I mean? Well, after World War II, and with the USA sensing the incoming Cold War, they invested heavily into the Japanese economy, likely due to its incredible strategic value. And this led to a period known as the economic miracle, running all the way from 1945-ish until the 1990s, leading to Japan becoming the second strongest economy in the world, and massively prosperous. However, this bubble did eventually burst, and this led to a severe recession in the 90s and 2000s, which are today often referred to as Japan's lost years or lost period. This was characterized by mass layoffs, general downsizing, and societal strife. Not exactly helped by the increase in violence, both gang and otherwise, terrorist attacks, a cataclysmic earthquake, a rise in childhood delinquency, and political upheaval. The birth rate had also been declining, and with an increasingly top-heavy and aging society, the fairly robust social support systems in place started to become strained. In response, people began to desert even larger towns en masse, heading for metropolitan centers like Tokyo and Osaka in search of work, hollowing smaller towns out further in a vicious cycle. As the more businesses that left, the fewer jobs remained. I really wish I could tell you that this has improved. At the same time, the younger generations began to realize that the prosperity that the previous generations had enjoyed was not going to be their lot at all. There were simply too many people and not enough jobs, even in the cities, especially for younger people. This led to a ton of apathy and resentment towards both older folks and society as a whole, exacerbated by the rise of the internet and cell phones. And this kicked off a full-on culture clash between city and country, as well as old and young. Well, at least they didn't need to go through grunge. There's always an upside. Kei's attitude and behavior is, again, not exactly atypical. And beyond this, Tokyo at the time was experiencing a flood of people seeking work from outside, which people in the city really did not appreciate. And this led to a pretty strong in-group preference among Tokyoites, one that endures today. And being able to navigate the labyrinthine and internationally notorious Tokyo rail system is something of a shibboleth for Tokyoites, and I can confirm this seriously. If your rail system is so confusing that there are multiple guidebooks for it and not one of them agrees with another one, say no more. Kei, however, suddenly notices a familiar face. This tall drink of absurdly handsome, an elementary school friend of his, Masaru Kato. He tries not to make eye contact, something else I'm sure all the teenagers will identify with. Seeing friends who knew you at a much younger age and fearful of them bringing up that time you painted yourself green and pretended to be a Ninja Turtle when you were 9, avoiding them. So yeah, he scorns his old chum and calls him a Yankee. We'll dive into this in the first interlude, don't you worry. But before we can learn any more about this, he sees a drunk and likely homeless guy take a spill onto the tracks. As onlookers gape and comment on it without doing anything, a sadly very Japanese thing to do, Kei realizes that he might just get to see someone creamed by a train and finds himself morbidly curious. He also has a nasty, supercilious chuckle at Kato, who appears genuinely terrified, saying that Kato was a chicken when he was a kid too. Only, to his absolute horror, he sees him, still shaking, climbing down onto the rails to help. And worse yet, Kato spots him and calls out for assistance. Despite himself, Kei finds himself doing exactly that, and with some effort, they manage to get the guy up onto the platform and out of harm's way. They then hear the sound of an oncoming train. Terrified, and at Kato's urging, they sprint down the tunnel hell for leather, hoping to outdistance the train before it stops, and it looks like they've made it. But nope, too late. They are reminded that this is the express, and the express does not stop here. Ugh, Tokyo subways, man. Kei turns and sees that, yeah, it's inevitable. he is about to die, and in what might be the first incarnation of the truck-son trope, both are struck at full speed and decapitated. Well, that's certainly a way to start a manga. Suddenly, they wake up in a mostly bare apartment alongside several other people, an ominous-looking black sphere, and yeah, okay. I was holding off mentioning this, but as it's probably one of the most iconic and important contributions of Gantz to manga as a whole, and also something that definitely contributes to its best-worst status, is the art. See, Oku was a pioneer when it came to using computer graphics to create manga, combining hand-drawn or at least digitally drawn characters and items with CGI or digitally imported and adapted photographs, as well as CGI models, all of which were then composited together digitally. It's an effect that is certainly unique, and it does not always work, especially initially. Hell, sometimes it feels like the characters, the inserted digital items, and the backgrounds exist on 3 different planes, likely due to perspective and lighting looking off at times. His character art is also kind of mediocre at this point, with some very strange faces. On the other hand, his sense of scale and location is phenomenal. And as Oku continues to produce this manga and refine his technique, it starts to work like absolute frigging gangbusters. You will see what I mean later on. And, believe it or not, a lot of these techniques are still used today in manga. Seriously, next time you read one and see a backdrop that looks a bit too photorealistic to be hand-drawn, take a careful look at characters and other foreground objects and see if you can spot a white or hazy border. According to Mrs. Owl, who knows way more about this stuff than I do, it's allegedly a byproduct of the compositing process, but I'll be perfectly honest, it's all a bit beyond me. Let me know in the comments if you understand this crap. Anyways, it appears, for the most part, that everyone there is just as nonplussed as they are, and, weirdly enough, back at the train tracks, the bodies and all the gore has also vanished, despite the onlookers recalling the incident clearly. Back at the apartment, we get to meet our cast. Masashi, a middle-aged teacher, Goro, an elderly former cancer patient, a young artistic pretty boy who stays nameless aside from his nickname Blondie, and Nishijo, or Nishi, a middle schooler. The last 2 identify themselves as Yakuza, and that's about it for now. Oh right, there's a dog. Don't mind him. None of them know why they are there, but we do quickly establish that all of them died before they woke up in this room. We get a brief interlude between Kei and Kato, as Kato tells him that he's changed and not in a good way. See, when Kei was in elementary school with him, he was utterly fearless and widely admired by the other students, especially Kato. He then tells Kei that he wanted to be just like him, even though he got sent to a dead-end school. We'll get into that a bit more later on too. Suffice to say, for now, it implies that Kato is poor and likely has a really bad home life. The next bit is one that I just have to explain, not only for story reasons, but because it's so absolutely and utterly insane, as they try to put together exactly what the hell is going on. Masashi tells them that they must be on some kind of reality TV show like Denpa Shonen. And okay, you know what? If you aren't interested in this topic, feel free to skip to the next bit. But for everyone else, we really need to talk about Denpa Shonen. You'll see why. Okay, so one staple of late 90s and early 2000s television in Japan was reality TV. These programs were an absolute sensation, probably even more so than in the West. Japanese reality TV shows ranged from pretty standard fare to cruel prank shows to game shows to the weird stuff, much of which fell within the genre of Gomon Terebi, or torture TV, shows basically designed to mess with, humiliate, or inflict suffering on participants for the schadenfreude of viewers. If you've seen 30 Minutes Over Tokyo, that's what's being parodied there. And, yeah, people who remember my Dead by Daylight Storytime streams might remember that I nearly got fired in my first year in Japan for showing my class that classic episode. I was young, dumb, and full of shirako back then. However, even amongst these programs, Denpa Shonen remains something special. The show essentially preyed on struggling entertainers, offering them money and exposure for participating in bizarre public challenges that ranged from cringy to nasty to embarrassing to outright inhumane to seriously dangerous. These, among other things, resulted in contestants being assaulted, both sexually and otherwise, as well as one nearly straight up dying in a situation that, even being charitable, could best be viewed as grossly negligent, if not actively malevolent, and audiences lapped this stuff up. As I've said before, it wasn't a great era in Japan, so bread and circuses, I guess. The most notorious of these, however, and likely the best known season, is that of struggling comedian Tomoaki Hamatsu, most commonly known now as Nasubi or Eggplant, due to his distinctive facial features. He found himself blindfolded and locked into an apartment, stripped naked, and was told that he would need to survive purely on magazine sweepstakes winnings until he had saved 1,000,000 yen, approximately $10,000. And if that sounds like a lot now, it was pretty big money in those days. What he wasn't told, however, was that he would be constantly filmed and broadcast live, Truman Show style, except here he would be ridiculed and used for pretty mean-spirited entertainment. It didn't go well, not only because Nasubi quickly began to starve, forced to initially survive off small amounts of rice, and later, I'm not kidding here, dog food, resulting in him rapidly becoming extremely malnourished, but because the producers took every opportunity to secretly mess with and torment him. For instance, sending deliveries of nice-smelling food to the apartment, but then taking them away and saying it was a mistake, and then making fun of his distress. However, over time, Nasubi actually got the hang of things, and despite his evidently declining mental health from the complete isolation and torment, after about a year, he did achieve his goal. But rather than giving him a pat on the back, the producers transported him to Korea and told him that he'd need to start over. Only this time, he would need to earn enough to afford the flight home to Japan. Now, pretty adept at this, he earned the money at high speed, but likely to keep the extremely popular and profitable season going, the producers began changing the rules again and again and again. For instance, after he raised the money, they refused to let him go and told him that no, he must not have heard them clearly. They told him that he had to be able to fly first class, and he did it. So, did they let him go? Well, what do you think? However, right after the next declination, likely as Nasubi appeared very close to a complete mental breakdown and quite possibly alt F4ing live on television, Denpa Shonen abruptly ended the show and released him. Accounts differ on what exactly happened after, but apparently he did end up getting a good amount of money and became something of a celebrity after all. However, he was left with severe mental health issues, difficulties reintegrating into society, and Nasubi visibly struggles even today. This, along with other incidents that made the news, resulted in changes to the law that succeeded in mostly legislating shows like Dempa out of existence, although, naturally, some did continue online. So yes, my point here is that characters waking up in a situation like Gantz and accepting that they're just part of some kind of mean-spirited but extremely elaborate reality TV gag, even with all the stuff that happens next, is far from unbelievable. And in that era, it wouldn't surprise me if Oku created Gantz partially to criticize shows like Dempa Shonen. Anyways. As they continue to talk, the group sees something bizarre, and in the first of many sequences that I simply cannot show you much of, Oku, a stunningly beautiful and buck-naked teenage girl, is teleported in piece by piece. Kei sums it up perfectly in one of the best lines in the early manga. Now I'm pretty sure that I cannot show you this either right now, but her wrists are marked with a lot of blood, suggesting that, yeah, the girl might well have been a contestant on Dempa Shonen. To make matters both stranger and worse, one of the Yakuza grab her and drag her off into another room for reasons that I need not go into. But while nobody is brave enough to go and stop it from unfolding, a terrified Kato sacks up and begins to brawl with him, revealing that, yeah, Kato was actually kind of strong. And note how already we're setting up character stuff. Kato is indeed a bit of a wuss, but this somehow makes his constant displays of bravery and chivalry all the more admirable. The brawl is stopped, however, when a strange song begins emanating from the sphere. Oh yeah, folks who've lived in Japan for a while might actually recognize this, especially if you live out in the country. But for everyone else, well, let's explain. Starting in 1928, in an effort to improve both the health of soldiers and the general citizenry, a special radio taiso, or radio calisthenics song, was played every morning at a certain time on the radio as a sign for everyone to get up and exercise. And this was actually banned after World War II, as allegedly it was too militaristic. But a new version of the song was put out in the early 50s and continues to be broadcast every single morning. And although the daily exercise portion has fallen out of fashion, it is still widely practiced by corporation compounds, schools, reformatories, and old people. This Gantz song is a direct and pretty entertaining reference to this weirdness, but keep it in mind as we go through, because much later on in the manga, it's actually going to wrap around to being quite meaningful. The orb then begins displaying a very odd and strangely comedic message, further promoting the group belief that this is just a TV show. But the quiet middle schooler Nishi says that, well, if you were to take the message literally, it's actually quite terrifying. Their old lives are gone, and the new life they've been granted is entirely in the hands of this orb. it continues to display text, now with a photograph, showing a creepy-looking kid, that it describes as the onion alien and, along with his personality traits, tells them to go and kill him. Where? But no, it's serious. The orb opens, revealing several futuristic-looking guns, as well as a naked and seemingly unconscious man. The guns, well, we will learn a lot more about them as we go. But for now, we've got 3 types. The Y gun, the X. No, I am not calling this a shotgun. It is and will always be the X rifle to me. And the X pistol, all of which have strange scopes on them that kind of double as X-rays. This feature, well, let's just say you'd be surprised at how often this comes in handy. In addition to the guns, they find boxes with their names, often combined with some sort of joke or insult, including one calling Kato Mr. Kato, which yes, is where that meme comes from. This is what Sulu went by in Japan, by the way, and this makes me suspect one big aspect of Gantz to come is a huge nod to classic Star Trek. See if you can spot it when we get there. Inside the boxes are leather or maybe vinyl suits, but before they can examine them more closely, they start getting teleported away. And just like that, the first hunt begins, and none of you have even the slightest idea what it is that you're in for. Outside, Kei desperately pulls on his suit, while everyone else just kind of does their own thing. Oh, Kato and the others call the dog Butterdog, and nope. There is literally no way I am going to be able to explain that on YouTube without getting slapped with an age restriction. It's really grody and refers to a scene we've skipped that I honestly can't even mention on YouTube. Google it if you really want, and it will make sense when you read the manga yourself, but trust me, this is one of those things that you probably don't even want to know. Nishi, for some reason, has actually been going around confirming the reality show concept to everyone, telling them that if they can find and kill the alien in 1 hour, they will win a ton of cash, and this definitely gets most of them moving. But the elderly Goro decides sod it and just goes home. Meanwhile, Masashi stumbles onto the onion alien using a sort of radar device. It's a very creepy and off-putting creature that sort of, but also sort of doesn't resemble a human. I can't actually confirm this, but I heavily suspect that the design is inspired by Bart Simpson. The rest of the hunters join him, and they wonder what comes next. They also comment on, this. The alien absolutely reeks. A smell they describe as rotting tofu, which is a pretty big change from the Japanese, where the smell was described as natto, a fermented soybean dish that, well, tastes like peanut butter stewed in an armpit, has the consistency of snot, and smells like an armpit full of peanut butter. Like a lot of dishes in Japan, I've never been sure how many people actually like the stuff and how many just eat it because Japanese people are expected to like natto. And I guess the principle of anything that tastes this bad must be good for you. Has anyone here tried natto, by the way? What did you think? Let me know in the comments. Kei and Kato, however, have decided to escort the girl home. Kei feels like a bit of a tit, not sure quite why he put the strange suit on, as now he looks like a bad cosplayer. But as he's fallen hook, line and sinker for the girl, he's not about to let her go off with another guy if he can help it. Yeah, as with a lot of stuff in this manga, try to look at it from the perspective of a teenage boy, especially if you were one once. I think that Oku, while he can be hyperbolic at times, absolutely nails it. Unsure of what to do, the Yakuza suddenly gets extremely angry after the alien drips reeking mucus on him, slamming it against a door and telling the people running the show to stop. But the creature then breaks free and leaps off a balcony in a definite Men in Black nod, flying a pretty fair distance, but landing badly near the trio, getting quite severely injured from the impact. However, before they can do anything, the other hunters barrel straight past them in pursuit, hooting and hollering, and having a complete blast now. Kato tries to stop them from chasing the injured creature, while Kei, in an attempt to seem heroic, continues to escort the girl home. Goro, meanwhile, is trying to go home himself and has walked quite a ways, but starts to hear a weird pinging sound. He chooses to ignore it, and in the first of many spectacularly gross head explosions to come, well, goes kersplat. So, here we have the first rule of Gantz. If you try to leave the perimeter of the hunt, you will get an audible warning, and if you persist, well, you die Scanners style. There are other rules, but we will learn those as we go. The blonde man eventually corners the onion alien, and despite its pleas for him to stop, he fires at it with his rifle. At first, nothing happens. Then, suddenly, the wall behind it explodes. Yup, both of the X-guns. As we'll learn later, this is because of the distinctive X-shaped muzzle flash, seem to inject some kind of microwave radiation into things and causes them to explode violently. And yeah, you will get to see this used on flesh and blood pretty often, and the effects are just as visceral as you'd expect. Cornered again, the desperate alien slashes at the Yakuza with some sort of concealed blade, and while he only gets a scratch, this prompts everyone to shoot it, blowing off its limbs and finally its head in a genuinely agonizing way. Yeah. As mentioned before, there is a lot of very detailed gore in this manga that, well, if you want to see it, I would recommend you go and read this thing because YouTube would not be okay with it. The blonde man who looked through the X-ray scope tells them that no, this was not just a human in a costume. Something is very, very wrong here. People respond differently to the revelation that they have actually just killed something sentient. The always noble Kato cries and then vomits, as does Masashi, but the others seem either unconcerned or mildly thrilled. Masashi, however, realizes that this might actually still be a mean-spirited reality TV show, and says that maybe they're doing the, he calls it an Eichmann test, which as far as I know is the Japanese term for the Milgram experiment, an extremely controversial psychological experiment that I am not going to go too deeply into right now. Suffice to say, it aimed to demonstrate that, while they believe they are following orders or some kind of protocol, many, or even most, everyday people will do cruel, horrible, and inhumane things to their fellow man. Feel free to Google it if you want to know more and also want to become horribly cynical in just a few minutes. They do, however, realize that they're being watched, but it turns out that, while the damage they've inflicted on their surroundings is visible, the hunter and the pile of viscera that remains of the onion alien are not. Let's call this Rule 2. On a hunt, neither you nor the aliens can be seen, but you can still affect the world. However, before they can puzzle more out, they hear heavy footsteps behind them. They turn and see this. A much bigger onion alien. And while it takes them a bit to twig on, you can probably guess what just happened. Yeah, you all just killed a kid because a floating testicle told you to. And now, the much scarier father has come home only to discover you covered in his kid's blood. Yeah. Remember when I said that Gantz sometimes out-berserks Berserk? And this is also where the story goes pitch black, and, well, you'll see. Oh boy, you'll see. The clearly distraught and furious Daddy Onion, who, by the way, towers over even the taller of the two Yakuza. We'll get to what happens next in just a bit, but I've always wondered if he is inspired by the Tyrant from the Resident Evil game, which was both hugely popular and influential at the time in Japan. Only, I'm assuming, with less eyeball vaginas. The Yakuza is not intimidated and headbutts him straight in the face, while the others begin to aim their guns. However, it grabs the Yakuza's head with a hand that is suddenly a bladed claw. Blondie fires. The alien uses the Yakuza to block the shot, and holy crap! You can't see it, but you can probably guess why I cannot show you the next, honestly, few panels. This is Tom Savini levels of gore. Most of his torso is blown apart, sending blood and organs everywhere. The alien who, yeah, I've always called the Onion Tyrant, which is just fun to say. Sorry, purists, I'm sure he's got a proper name somewhere. Proceeds to cut an absolute swath through the hunters, slashing throats, sending limbs flying, and in an instant takes them to pieces, leaving only Kato standing. However, before he can be cut down too, the other Yakuza, barely alive, frigging mag dumps the creature, sending it to the ground before he also collapses dead. And this is followed by, well, the first absolutely brilliant sequence in a manga that is kind of full of absolutely brilliant sequences. This is when, reading Gantz for the first time, I knew for a fact that I was gonna love it. Suddenly, Masashi and the others wake up on a rooftop, surrounded by studio equipment. The Onion Tyrant steps forward and removes his mask, revealing the brawny actor underneath, and everyone has a laugh. It was all, indeed, part of an elaborate Japanese reality TV show, and they were the unwitting subjects of some sort of partially hypnosis-based prank. Everyone has a huge moment of relief, only then we pan away to Masashi's dismembered torso, and we realize that this was just his dying dream. As his life drained away, he escaped into a happy delusion. Sweet Jiminy Christmas, that is dark, and it's one of the many moments of Gantz that really does stay with me. Meanwhile, Kato attempts to reason with the alien, who can only shriek at him in another language. He's pretty distraught about what they did, but naturally doesn't want to die himself. He reluctantly points his Y-gun at the creature, but too late, realizes that he cannot kill, even in defense of his own life. The creature slashes at him, but his reflexes as sharp as ever. Kato is narrowly able to dodge, instead tumbling down the nearby embankment. Kei and the girl, who... okay, to stop calling her the girl, we'll later learn that her name is also Kei Kishimoto, and they discover the remains of the team with the Onion Tyrant standing over them. We also get some of our first clear glimpses of the now extremely iconic Gantz suit. Seriously, if you were in Akihabara circa 2004-2005, this thing was everywhere. The creature begins rushing towards them, and they flee, but are lucky enough for the creature to get struck by a car. So yeah, adding on to Rule 2, stuff from the real world can also interact with Gantz hunters and aliens. They can be touched, smelled, or I guess tasted, just not seen or heard. We will later learn that they are being shifted to a different wavelength, whatever that means. However, naturally, it's only stunned and resumes the attack almost immediately. An increasingly desperate Kei begins to think of Kato for some reason and flashes back to his childhood, realizing that he was right. There was indeed a time when Kei was better than he is now, and inspired by a trick that allowed him to escape a much bigger kid who was bullying him, runs and slides between the monster's legs in a really daring move. And as he runs, we see that something's happening to the suit. Sure enough, Kei begins to accelerate. He leaps and finds himself soaring through the air as strange vein-like growths spread through the suit, and okay, this is probably the #1 area where my own headcanon and the official explanation differ quite a bit. For the longest time, I, and the people I would speak with about Gantz, believed that what these suits were doing is linking with the wearer's circulatory system to draw on their blood and using it to create a hydraulic effect. But according to the official explanation, what's actually happening here is a special fluid already inside the suit. Honestly, that creates even more questions. So, as it's been hard to shake, I am going to keep my headcanon here, admittedly because it's just metal as all hell, even if it's not completely true. Regardless, as we'll see more of shortly, the suits are damn powerful. They grant incredible physical enhancements, not just in terms of strength and speed, but in terms of raw toughness. And in the first of many moments in this manga, that made me crack a massive smile. Kato, at the bottom of the embankment, sees Kei flying through the air and is gobsmacked. Yeah, that's just awesome. And see, that's the thing about Gantz. It manages to be gritty, dark, and gory as hell, as well as having a lot of genuinely tense scenes and battles, but it also manages to just be cool, and I quite like that in a story. It helps keep me engaged. Anyway, the creature does catch him, but before it can tear into his face, Kato gets it in a headlock from behind, resulting in his arm being nearly severed by its razor-sharp claw. Oh dear, that's just grody. The way it falls limp like that at a horrible angle, and spraying blood. He goes into hypervolemic shock almost instantly, and a desperate Kei dashes in, his suit further hardening, and finds that, to his astonishment, he can easily overpower the creature, holding both of its arms and then breaking them into gory messes, in what I suspect might be a nod to one of the amazing fight scenes from Guyver the Dark Hero, a cult sci-fi action staple of my teens that I would likely best describe as a gory Power Rangers meets the Punisher. The alien begins to plead for mercy, which, considering they just killed its kid, oh man, that's messed up. And Kato tells Kei to stop, as they were the ones in the wrong. However, suddenly, something comes flying out of nowhere. A bola of some kind. It wraps around the alien and then anchors it to the ground. Then, with a bachi-bachi, the sound effect for crackling, Nishi, the oddly off-putting middle schooler, appears, holding a Y-gun. This is another ability these suits have. They can cloak, and it's almost definitely a nod to the monster from Predator, a nearly perfect 80s action horror film that might be one of my favorite movies of all time. It not only did the whole ruthless hunter thing, but the alien had a ton of wicked cool technology, including a very similar cloaking device. As an aside, it also has one of the most fascinating production histories that I have ever heard of. Seriously, go and read up on it yourself. It will bake your noodle. Anyway, Nishi tells Kei to kill the creature, but much like Kato and despite his morbid fascination with the homeless man about to get hit by the train at the start of the story and all of his big talk, Kei finds that he also just can't do it. But, and this is something to also keep in mind for later, Nishi, as it so happens, is actually a bloody nasty piece of work, and senses that he and Kei are not too different deep down, aside from one single really important difference. This will come up way later in the manga, to the point where I always forget just how early it was foreshadowed. Regardless, Nishi then shoots it with the Y-gun, but rather than exploding, it gets teleported away, off into space. And no, we never really learn much more about this, but at least we've rounded out our arsenal somewhat. The X-pistols and X-rifles are lethal, while the Y-gun is versatile. It's capable of binding and immobilizing creatures with an unbreakable tether, and then teleporting them off-planet. As it also teleports things in slices, I think this implies that it relies on similar technology to the Gantz transporter. Kei also begins to get teleported, as he desperately tries to shake the now lifeless Kato awake. Which, once again, damn man. They all reappear in the Gantz room and are astonished to see that Kato does get teleported back, somehow with all of his wounds healed. However, aside from Nishi and the dog, Kishimoto, Kei, and Kato are the only survivors of Hunt 1. And this basically gives us rules 3 and 4. If you die in the game, you're dead. But if even a little bit of life remains in you, at the end of the hunt, you will be teleported back and completely healed. And spoiler, this is going to come in handy. We also see that everyone is given points based on how many aliens they killed, as well as being generally ridiculed by the orb. None of them killed anything aside from Nishi, so none of them get points. But at the very least, they lived. We then move on to an extended, but honestly kind of tedious sequence, where they argue with the snide Nishi. And this is mostly to give us a whole bunch of exposition. In a nutshell, they will continue to be brought back to this room at random intervals. And when they do, they will be forced to participate in hunts. Nishi has, in fact, been doing this for over a year. A ton of others have been brought in, and aside from him, well, they've all died. We also get a theory. And yeah, as with a lot of Gantz, there are many things that will never be explained, and so it's workable. When they were hit by the train, their real bodies did in fact die, but they were copied somehow, and then their original bodies were destroyed or more likely made invisible. The system is, however, imperfect, and sometimes it glitches. And yes, this will come up very soon. We also get our last rule to keep in mind, as it's going to get really important later on in the manga. Trust me on this. Number 5. Hunters have bombs in their brain, and these bombs can be detonated at any time, whether on a hunt or not. And along with trying to escape a hunt, if you were to tell anyone outside of Gantz about Gantz, or reveal the existence of Gantz in any way, the bomb will trigger. And yes, there is kind of a plot hole involving this that comes up later on, although it might not be. Again, a lot of this story is just never really explained all that well. With that, they find that they can leave, but are still, for whatever reason, invisible to the world. No, the duration of this is never really established as far as I know, Aside from, it just wears off at some point. We follow Kishimoto first. She goes home and finds the bloody bathtub, where, let's not say any more, but after her sister comes home and greets her, she quickly realizes that, yeah, as Nishi had intimated, the system glitched, and rather than destroying and recreating her, it straight up duplicated her. This has to be another Star Trek reference, right? Because this was more than one episode. Either way, this means that she is now a non-person and has nowhere to go. And yeah, we also start to get a bit of insight into Kishimoto's character and why she did what she did in a few subtle ways. She also finds Kei's yearbook, which says that he goes to Seigo High. Yeah, I really doubt this, but I will explain more when we get there. It's not important right now. Regardless, she takes off. Kei, on the other hand, falls asleep, and when he wakes, thinks that it was all a dream. But he then sees the suit and the X-gun on his chair, and this leads us into the next intermission segment, which, okay, for the sake of flow, I am going to tell just a bit out of order. The next intermission starts, showing us Kishimoto sleeping rough in the park, where she finds herself terrorized by a homeless man who was touching her in her sleep. Homelessness in Japan is a very complicated topic, but it became a big problem during the lost decades, particularly due to a lot of red tape that prevented people without a fixed address from receiving welfare. The situation has actually improved substantially since then, while at the same time kind of becoming worse. For instance, there are a lot of people living in Tokyo, Osaka, and other large metropolitan centers who simply cannot find full-time work. And with Tokyo rents being bananas, we've seen a recent phenomenon in the form of the so-called cyber homeless. These folks essentially pay for a 12-hour session at a cheap internet cafe, which includes a bench and sometimes coffee, and they basically bring a sleeping bag and just sleep there every night. No, this doesn't connect to the story in any way, but I just thought you'd find it interesting. Meanwhile, Kei is back at school, and okay, so as mentioned earlier, the term Yankee is about to become rather important. It's a term that sounds very odd to people outside of Japan, and honestly doesn't really translate well. Punk or bully doesn't cover it, as it's way more intense than that. And you know what? This next bit is going to be kind of long, so if you aren't interested in the cultural stuff, well, just skip it. For everyone else, well, let's talk about Yankees. And no, we are not talking about a baseball team. So yeah, Yankee. Basically, in the context of this story, it refers to school-age delinquent street toughs who often have connections to biker gangs or street gangs, and especially in that era, were a massive societal problem that Japan simply had no idea what to do about. Now yes, the term Yankee is a lot more overarching in reality. Technically, the term is something of a catch-all for younger, non-Yakuza gang members, ranging from the Japanese pseudo-greaser of yesteryear. If you've read One Punch Man, Metal Bat is a perfect parody of one of them, complete with that distinctive strut, as well as the pompadour haircut, to teamers, more modern street hooligan groups, and other similar phenomena. In modern parlance, though, Yankee mostly refers to a violent delinquent still in high school who runs with other similar delinquents and acts antisocial, engages in petty criminality, often fighting with groups from other schools, extreme levels of bullying towards underclassmen, as well as extorting money from students. generally with violence or threats of violence. If you want to see a bit more of this, go and read The Amazing Holy Land, which deals with this really bloody well. And if that author's name sounds familiar, he's the dude that took the reins on Berserk. Yeah, that Koji Mori. The rise of Yankee culture started in the post-World War II era, and the name is, as you likely guessed, a reference to American soldiers living on military bases, who would go on benders and act like massive hooligans in nearby towns and cities, but they also spent money like drunken sailors, at least from the perspective of impoverished post-war Japanese civilians, and they also introduced a lot of the locals to rock and roll and Western movies. Kids growing up around this time came to adopt this culture and the Yankee was born. However, they weren't a massive problem until the lost decades, where they became part of the whole culture clash I mentioned earlier. Young people, realizing that their generation was not going to get a slice of the pie and were in fact completely boned compared to previous generations, became really angry and really resentful. And this led to many rejecting Japanese cultural harmony and tradition, and instead idolizing criminals, gangsters, bikers, and punks. As mentioned, these were quite a big problem in the era, especially in the cities. And while, like a lot of the societal issues Gantz refers to, are still, well, issues, this was so much worse back then, and this was due to, at least in part, the extremely lenient laws pertaining to young offenders, where, for instance, even the most notorious cases, such as that of Boy a 14-year-old serial killer, only received a brief anonymous stint in a reformatory. And this means that even where these Yankees perpetrated serious violence, resulting in the police becoming involved, the worst that would happen to them is that they would go elsewhere for a year or two and maybe change schools after, then be reintegrated into society without any real lasting repercussions. This meant that, especially back then, there was nothing you could do if one of these groups of Yankees decided to target you, other than change schools yourself. Teachers were, well, let's be honest here, are reluctant to intervene, not only due to limited power to apply consequences, but due to fears regarding personal safety. This meant that you would have to go to the police, which now might at least result in them visiting your school, but back then wouldn't have done very much. The police considered things that happened inside families and inside schools to be outside of their bailiwick, and, well, they had their hands full dealing with a massive surge in organized crime, drugs, and the like. Plus, your school might well punish you or your homeroom teacher for reporting it, as this would damage the school's reputation, and for this reason too, it would most likely just be ignored. This is still a very common way of handling bullying and petty criminality at schools now. Hell, I recall a particularly nasty incident at one of our local schools back in the early 2000s. A teacher tried to intervene in a situation where a Yankee was terrorizing and extorting younger students, and this resulted in him sneaking up behind her and pushing her down a flight of concrete stairs. Only then did the police get involved, due to her being put in intensive care, and this was due to her family reporting it rather than the school. As far as I remember, he didn't even deny it, and got less than a year in a pretty cushy reformatory out in the country, and had to attend another school after release, which, if I recall, was actually nicer than the original school. The kid who reported the initial harassment actually had to move to another town, due to him and his family being threatened and their house getting repeatedly vandalized by the other school Yankees, and I might be wrong, but I think the teacher was moved to another prefecture too. However, again, things have actually improved somewhat in this regard, due to the numerous anti-bullying mandates having come down, mostly after a lot of really nasty incidents occurred, and the laws have changed slightly to allow all the juvenile offenders to be treated more harshly in the case of violent crimes. It still happens, and bullying is still a massive problem in Japanese schools though, which we will discuss in greater detail after hunt number 4. If you want to know more now, I would go and watch my early series on Another. Just please don't mind the jank-ass audio. Anyways, back to the intermission. Sure enough, we learn that one of Kei's classmates is being extorted by the school Yankees, and it turns out that as he's tapped out, they have quite cruelly allowed him to pick their next target, and he, as per narrative causality, picks Kei. One of the Yankees demands 50,000 yen, about $500, by the end of the day. Only, we see that Kei actually brought the Gantz suit to school and quite intelligently puts it on under his uniform. So, let's call this rule number 6. You can take your gear out of Gantz and into the real world and it'll still work fine, meaning that you can get up to all sorts of shenanigans unless you violate Rule 5 and risk exposing Gantz to outsiders. However, well, there's another big downside to this, and we will see it when we get to hunt number 2. Regardless, Kei is taken to the school boss, a term for basically the toughest kid in the gang, revealing that he's quite a dangerous martial artist. But the school allows Kei to basically ignore his strikes and easily overpower him. While they are briefly intimidated, the Yankees tell him that this isn't over and... okay, like a lot of stuff in Gantz, while this does come up again a bit later on, it never really becomes plot relevant. I have to wonder if this is Oku engaging in a bit of retroactive fantasy the way we all do about our childhoods. Hell, I know I still do this even now. Back at home, Kei finds Kishimoto dozing outside her door, leading to a sequence that, yeah. This is one of the bits that gets frequently criticized for being weird, but honestly, I don't mind. Let's take a look. After some discussion, Kishimoto asks if she can stay with Kei as a pet. She has a pretty fan-servicey shower sequence that, no, I can't show you any of, while he runs out to buy condoms. However, he quickly realizes that he has completely misread the entire situation. She means that she wants to live with him and basically be taken care of, not that she wants to engage in any sort of relationship. Kei does push his luck a little bit, but yeah, this is why I quite like this sequence, as, while we do get some more exposition, there is a lot of character stuff going on with him that is rather subtle. As soon as he realizes that Kishimoto isn't into it, and is actually pretty messed up in her own right, he doesn't pursue the matter any further, despite him being evidently annoyed and let down. See, this is Kei. He can be a salty little douche sometimes. He can be a coward. He is completely obsessed with getting laid. He's rather selfish and isn't always the nicest or most charitable, but somewhere deep down, under all the fluff, he's actually a good dude. Kato, as described earlier, though, isn't going to a good school like Seigo, And okay, yeah, when I said that I doubt Kei actually goes to Seigo, well, Seigo is a very nice school and very exclusive. Any kid acting out to that degree, even in that era, would have been kicked out. But, very briefly, schools in Japan are their own thing. If you're lucky, fairly wealthy, and come from a decent family, plus you have strong academics, you can probably get into a decent high school. It'll take a bit of interviewing and tests, but you'll find something. Otherwise, unless you are great at sports, your luck is going to vary. But in the city, you could well end up getting stuck in a dump school, and those can be rough, especially if your family isn't supportive. As to get into anything better, you really do need to attend interviews and write tests, which requires some money and a lot of driving around. Kato is indeed attending one of these dump schools, and much like Kei, runs afoul of a local Yankee group after he defends a younger student from them. This group, however, is way bigger and nastier, and plans to jump him later on before letting their boss, a heavyweight boxer, what are you doing in high school, called Onizuka, rape him. Oh, Gantz. However, Kato gets word of this and ambushes the boss, catching him by surprise on the crapper and beating 7 shades of hell out of him, which secures his safety. Kato is kind of a badass, despite his meek nature. And yes, we will learn a lot more about him and why he is the way he is as the story goes on. Let's just say there is a reason he's a fan favorite. We then get an extended segment where we are introduced to some more characters. First up, a particularly nasty Bozoku dude who... Okay, yeah, Bozoku. Japanese biker gangs were another big problem in that era, and they scared the ever-loving hell out of people. They actually date back to the 1950s and came into prominence during the 70s social unrest, which I haven't talked about in a video yet. I might end up doing in this series, but they only became a big problem in the 80s and 90s. Now, a lot of folks, even within Japan, are quite familiar with and even romanticize the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia, who've been around for basically forever, but sort of keep to themselves. Unless you go looking for them to borrow money, buy a gun, or something along those lines, or unless you're involved with certain specific industries, you probably won't even know they're there. The closest you might get is having to pay some protection money or getting ripped off at specific bars in Kabukicho, but by and large, while they can be pretty damn evil, they generally don't mess with Joe Public. Bozoku are another matter entirely, translated as something like the violence and reckless driving tribe. I'm not kidding. There used to be huge mass rallies and convoys of these dudes. They quickly developed a reputation for being indiscriminately violent, and while they did generally just brawl with other biker gangs, or the occasional random beatdown, they also raised complete and utter bedlam from time to time, blocking roads, breaking windows, and attacking civilian vehicles, as well as, well, civilians. However, much like Yankees, legal reforms that allowed the police to more easily apprehend and prosecute Bozoku substantially and rapidly reduced their number in the late 2000s and early 2010s, and while they do still exist today, you just don't see that many of them, so fortunately the era of the psychotic biker convoys is long gone. Anyways, said Bozoku and his small group get lured into an ambush by a larger gang and, not to mince words, get beaten to death. It's kind of brutal. And sure enough, they get zooped up by Gantz. Next, we meet an actual named character, Hojo. This absurdly good-looking, I think male model, and minor celebrity, full name Hojo Masanobu, is being perved on by women at a local CD shop. However, it turns out that he's trying to avoid his stalker, nicknamed Sadako, after the now iconic long-haired ghost from the Ring series. He borrows a bike from one of the girls chasing him and agrees to let her ride behind him, but it turns out that Sadako quietly pushed her aside and got on in her place. His eventual super freakout, combined with a dozing truck driver, proceeds to cause a huge accident, killing him, Sadako, an old lady, and her grandson, and dragging them all into Gantz. Okay then. Our last little bit of intermission shows us more of Kei and Kishimoto's relationship developing. They're rapidly becoming friends, although he clearly still has intentions. She does confide in him somewhat though, telling him her backstory, a sadly common tale in Japan, even now. Her mother is a kyoiku mama, which is probably best translated as helicopter parent or tiger mom, although this is a little different, and as far as I know predates both of those terms. Basically, a kyoiku mama is an insanely overbearing woman that drives their kid to study all the time to their extreme detriment, not permitting them any sort of hobbies, social life, or relaxation, in the hopes that said kid will go to a good school and thus a good university. It's still a huge problem now, maybe even worse than it was back then, and is also a very complicated socio-cultural issue, but has been a trope in anime and manga for at least 30 years. If you recall Chi-Chi's relationship with Gohan in Dragon Ball Z, that's what's being referred to there. It has unfortunately resulted, or at least been blamed for, a lot of kids becoming shut-ins, developing a full-on phobia of school, or even, much as Kishimoto did, straight up snapping and attempting soy sauce. She remarks that she's actually genuinely happy to be dead, even if it means being a Gantz hunter. Kei, however, still has his eye on the main chance, trying to think of some way to make her fall for him, and then, to his joy, she says that she's in love with someone at last, before absolutely crushing him by telling him that, guess what, it's Kato. Yep, that's why they call it a crush, mate. You generally end up in a bloody heap on the floor. Oh, and if you're wondering about Kei's backstory and why he lives in an apartment alone at 15, well, if you watch our Satogashi video, you might get a hint. But otherwise, we will learn much more later on. Short answer, Japanese schooling is bananas. Kato, on the other hand, has a very rough living situation. He's an orphan who was taken in reluctantly along with his little brother by his extremely abusive relatives. He wants to get out with his younger brother before lasting damage is done to him and for them to find their own place. Kato, you're such a good dude. Lastly, we see that Nishi isn't just a bit of a little creeper. The kid is actually a budding serial killer. This has to be a reference to Boy A, right? Going around killing stray cats with his X-gun. He's genuinely excited, having the feeling that tonight is gonna be a good night. Yes, thank you. Now that song is in my head too. And sure enough, teleporting begins. Just like that, our new team is gathered. We start where we left off last time, the three Bozoku. Yes, I know they have names, but they're such nothing characters, I'm not even gonna bother. The model-looking guy Hojo, the grandmother and her grandkid, and Hojo's stalker Satoko. They've all joined the main cast in the orb room. Tensions flare as the Bozoku demand answers and act like hooligans, while also aggressively hitting on Kishimoto, who in turn appears practically glued to Kato's side, much to Kei's frustration. Yeah, I want you to keep an eye on Kei, as he really does evolve as a character, and it's one of the most interesting things about the story in that this development is not linear. As a minor spoiler, he will remain a frustrating character for a bit, with the odd pretty cool or even watershed moment here and there. And then, at some point in the story, he gradually begins to grow up, and you'll see why he's one of my favorite characters in any manga of all time. Not because he's super cool or super heroic, but because I really do understand him. He's a teenage boy with all of the flaws, insecurities, and selfishnesses that implies. Meanwhile, the grandmother and her young grandson are freaking out. It's weird that neither kids nor animals are exempt from being drawn into Gantz on their death, although I guess once we learn what Gantz exactly is, which by the way comes way later in the story, this makes either perfect sense or zero sense, depending on how cynical you feel today. Kato, meanwhile, a natural leader, begins trying to rally the panicking group with limited success, as well as provoking Nishi's anger, as he demands that Kato shut the hell up and essentially just leave the newcomers to their deaths. This does give us an interesting insight into the difference between their personalities. Nishi views Gantz as a competitive game, while Kato is proceeding as if it were cooperative. Honestly, with the way points work, you wouldn't be wrong to agree with Nishi at this point. But let's just say both of them are right, and both of them are wrong. And just like that, things very nearly turn into complete and utter frigging bedlam. However, before things can really get out of control, well, they will, but at least this provides a temporary armistice. A now familiar song plays. Man, I'm annoyed that I can't play the actual song for you. How the hell do you copyright something from the frigging 1920s in HK, especially a free radio broadcast? Regardless, the orb gives us our briefing for Hunt 2 and yes, okay. This is going to need its own section because it's too much fun. As always, if the cultural stuff doesn't hold much interest for you, feel free to skip ahead to the next numbered chapter. Enjoy! Okay, so where to start here? Well, the design of their target is based on a musician by the name of Seiji Tanaka. How on earth would I describe Seiji Tanaka? He's an eccentric musician that obtained moderate fame in the 1970s for his vaguely country, vaguely enka, vaguely folk, and sometimes vaguely comedic music. That reminds me of the terrible Afrikaans country or folk songs that my father adored, and yeah, sadly experiments at uploading even a tiny portion of one of his songs got immediately claimed, so just look for him on YouTube, especially his song Beautiful Sunday. His personality is likely what got him most of his fans, particularly amongst kids, as he, imagine if Mr. Rogers was younger, Japanese, and also just a little off. Regardless, he's fairly obscure today, but clearly he made an impression on Hiroya Oku, who based our Hunt 2 alien on him, and also, Japanese humor as anyone who has spent much time there will be able to tell you, is maybe 10% mean-spirited physical humor and pranks, 20% sex jokes, and 70% awful dad joke level puns. And of course, in the Japanese style, Seiji Tanaka becomes Tanaka Seiji, after which you add one letter to get Tanaka Seijin. Seijin being one way to say space alien in Japanese. So, read now, we get Tanaka Alien. Yeah. Now the rest of this seems to be mostly a rumor, but apparently Tanaka was not a fan of having a killer alien in a very gory, very booby, and very controversial manga based on his likeness, and he allegedly threatened to sue. Remember, Japan has no fair use or parody exception, and the courts almost always side with the plaintiff in cases like this, so they changed it to Suzuki Alien in the anime and later reprints, although I've never seen the latter in the wild. And the English versions all use Tanaka, so who the hell knows? Maybe it's just a case of internet telephone. What is really funny about all of this is, if you go and look at any of Tanaka's videos on YouTube, you'll probably find the majority of the comments mentioning Gantz. So yeah, Tanaka, mate, on the minuscule but non-zero chance you end up watching this, be a bit more grateful anyway. At Kato's urging, the Gantz participants begin arming themselves, although persuading them to put suits on is proving quite difficult. Regardless, as he prepares to don his own suit, Kei makes a horrible discovery. It's gone. Oh crap. Remember? He left it at home. And this gives us a new rule, or at least a modifier to one of the rules from part 1. You can take your gear out of Gantz and use it in the real world however you see fit. I guess so long as you don't give the game away. But if it's not on you at the time of you being beamed in, you will have to do without it, as Kato is able to persuade everyone besides the Bozoku to get into their suits. Kei freaks out. Nishi taunts him, calling him a dead man walking, and Kato is genuinely astonished at the carelessness of his friend. Nishi intimates that there's something they can do, but refuses to tell them. Spoiler, he's talking out of his ass. But before things get uglier, the Bozoku leader has finally put his suit on, much to the amusement of his friends, and they're messing with the various Gantz guns, when one accidentally, shoots Nishi in the face. The suit seems to absorb the blast, which raises questions as we'll see in the next bit. But Nishi responds by straight up shooting him in the head. A guy without a suit. Yeah, this is gonna have to be censored. It's an extremely long and extremely gory sequence in which the Bozoku's head blows up everywhere. Kishimoto begins to freak out. Remember, she was not privy to the massacre in Hunt 1. And yeah, Nishi is a straight up psychopath. We will learn more about his character much later on, but for now, that's basically it. Shortly after this, we see a brief confrontation between Nishi and Kato. And yes, if my audio sounds a little bit different, I had to take a break halfway through this segment. Babies, man. Nishi seems to sense something about him, aside from his strength, his natural charisma, and his leadership skills. And while he does make threats, as always, he fades out pretty fast. However, Kato is starting to realize that the suits give the Gantz hunters absolutely staggering physical power and resilience. How much, do you ask? Well, Oku has in fact gone into detail about the suits in his Gantz manuals, but it's all pretty wibbly-woo and incredibly inconsistent. I personally like my headcanon as per the previous video a lot more, as it's both metal AF and makes a bit more sense than his hand-wavium. However, the thing that constantly frustrates me is the quantification of the specific benefits given. We'll be exploring these a lot more in both this and the next hunt, but yeah, let's just say inconsistent. They allegedly allow the wearer to easily lift 15 tons, which, no, aside from one or two banana nut muffin insane moments, and are also virtually indestructible within certain constraints. They do at least seem to be able to take an impact from the X-gun, and considering how powerful those things are, they are at the very least pretty tough. And again, we will go into more details as the story progresses, and we can see the limitations of the suits explored. Regardless, Nishi asks to be sent into the hunt zone first, and Gantz obliges. As they depart, Nishi reiterates a core principle of Gantz. While they are a team, they are also competing for points in order to escape. It's all well and good to try and keep everyone alive, but at the end of the day, this mindset might well get them all killed. Kei, on the other hand, continues to freak out. He is about to be sent on a hunt without a suit, which is not good. Kato, however, tells him not to worry. He will protect him. This is pretty shameful, considering Kishimoto is right there, and this causes her to fall for Kato even harder. Poor Kei, but Kato, you're such a good dude. Meanwhile, somewhere far away, we see a television set playing a Tanaka Seiji concert as a huge quantity of eggs begin to hatch. Kei is teleported in, on the middle of a busy road in the path of a truck bearing down on him. Yeah, you really can see Oku getting to grips with his digital art style now, and it's bloody effective. Actually, a bit later in Hunt 2, there's this whole sequence which contains one of my favorite panels from the early manga. We'll get there. While he does narrowly avoid getting his head bashed, oh dear. He's been dropped in right near their target, who is rapidly approaching. This time though, there's something a bit different. The alien is accompanied by a good few small, ugly-looking bird creatures. Kei, exercising a bit of genuine ingenuity, feels around for the headless biker's corpse with his yet-to-be teleported torso, and takes the X-pistol the man fired at Nishi in order to at least bring a weapon with him. Quick thinking, mate. And yes, you might as well call this Chekhov's X-pistol no. And that sees out Volume 3, although I will say, Hiroya Oku's volume extras are quite something, ranging from a very cute and endearing idea, such as cat-shaped rice cakes, to discussions of the various Western media that inspired specific elements of Gantz, to pretty much porn, to, I think it's an extract from his even more controversial manga Hen, which is actual porn, and we will get there when we get there. No, there's no way I can show you much of that. Volume 4 starts off with a terrified Kei facing off against the Tanaka alien, not quite sure what sort of move to make without his suit. However, the alien seems to have zero interest in him and walks past. This is one aspect of the manga that isn't often explored or even really discussed, but this is likely what Nishi was alluding to. Sometimes, but not always, monsters will ignore unsuited Gantz members so long as they make no offensive moves. However, this comes up maybe twice in the entire manga, and never again to my memory, for reasons that will become obvious later, so I would not worry about it. Kei aims at the back of its head, but, yet again, finds that he cannot pull the trigger, especially when he thinks of Nishi, who, remember, said that Kei was, somewhere deep down, just like him. And that's frightening, because Nishi is crazier than a fridge full of weasels. However, as he worries, one of the weird birds climbs up and starts biting him pretty hard. As he starts trying to shake it off, he realizes that, the two creatures are connected. And sure enough, the Tanaka alien rounds on him and starts... Okay, the Tanaka alien says a lot of weird crap. I'm not going into it too much. It's stuff the real Tanaka Seiji would say. Catchphrases, song lyrics, and his weird one-liners. And I guess that's how they attempt to communicate with humans. I swear. I should do an art contest as to what the aliens would look like if they watched a modern singers concert instead. Meanwhile, the other Gantz hunters are gradually being teleported in, and they start to realize that, yeah, Kato was telling the truth, and thus was likely correct about the suits. Well, most of them. The Bozoku guys, start wandering away, attempting to leave the zone, which means that if they don't stop, it'll be super fun, head explodey times. However, Kato shouting at them does alert Kei to his position at least. In a weirdly comedic and yet genuinely tense sequence, Kei is unsure of how to respond to the weird Tanaka creature, which suddenly turns angry and starts following him. This causes him to walk away at speed, with the Tanaka chasing him also at a kind of speed walk. I have no idea why, but this bit really tickles me. Regardless, Kei leads the creature into the waiting group of hunters, and things are about to pop off in a big way and get pretty messed up. Because Gantz. Let's take a look. As the hunters cluster around the Tanaka creature, unsure of exactly what to do, an attacking enemy would be simple, but this thing is just, well, standing there menacingly. One of the Bozoku remark that it looks like one of the robots made by Honda or Suzuki, almost certainly a nod to the world-famous Ashimo units that had debuted at the time and honestly even now are pretty damn impressive, leading to the development of several technologies we use today, including those self-balancing walking assist devices. Anyway, they argue about what to do next. Kato says that the creature doesn't seem dangerous, but Kei reminds him about what happened on the last hunt. However, a shimmer appears as Nishi, cloaked, steps on and squashes one of these small birds, almost certainly trying to agitate the creature so that it goes on the offensive and wipes out the party, leaving him to collect the points. Yeah, you dick. And this is very solo leveling. Only this immediately backfires. In a schadenfreude-tastic moment, the creature's mouth opens and emits a powerful sonic blast, forcing everyone behind to cover their ears and knocking Nishi out of his cloak. Oh bugger. Nishi retreats down into the canal below them, but the creature leaps after him, still firing off sonic blasts. Nishi returns fire with the X-gun, but it darts out of the way before he can hit it. This thing is substantially more formidable than even the Onion Tyrant. However, the Tanaka seems to be coming out ahead, landing another hit with its sonic cannon, this time fully destroying Nishi's cloaking device. Yeah, that thing also actually doubles as a Gantz radar, and this heralds Nishi getting pretty handily thrashed and eventually cornered in a very creepy pair of panels, with Tanaka approaching and trying to hit him point blank. But Nishi catches it by surprise and punches it directly into a nearby stairwell, bouncing it off the steel railing. One thing that I must give Oku props for are his fights, which feel visceral, desperate, and crystal clear as to what's happening to who and where. This is harder than you'd think to do in a drawn medium. However, we then see that something is leaking out of Nishi's suit, specifically out of these so-called caps. Is it blood? Is it essential fluid? Does it really matter? Not really. Whatever the case is, this is another Gantz rule. The suits are indeed powerful and tough, but they do have an upper limit. And I will throw in a mild spoiler here. They're really good when it comes to absorbing directly applied force, such as from bullets or bludgeoning attacks, but much less so when it comes to energy-based weapons and acids, and they're also quite vulnerable to cutting and piercing weapons of a certain power. When the suit breaks, it no longer offers any protection and will bleed from the caps. Nishi begins calling for help. Yeah, ironic, considering he was the one playing silly buggers for most of the story thus far, but this is where everyone rallies, comes together and fights as one. Nope. Most of the others, including Kei, tell Nishi to basically go roll it up and stuff it up his butt, but Kato tells Kei to help everyone figure out their suits and prepares to leap down to save Nishi, except he's too late. The Tanaka creature closes the distance and hits him point blank, and yeah, in another sequence that I can't show you much of, holy crap is this bit graphic. Nishi's eyes and eardrums explode, as do several of his teeth, spraying blood everywhere as he screams. Kato is able to grab the terribly injured kid and drags him to the concrete paving at the edge of the canal, but the Tanaka creature pursues, and after a brief struggle, Kato grabs it in a bear hug, and as he squeezes, oh what the hell is that? Something like a horrible, stinking, slime-covered bird thing bursts out, and Kei is able to hit it with the sending gun. We see that the Tanaka is basically just a robotic suit that allowed the bird thing to move and breathe in our atmosphere. Regardless, just like that, it seems the hunt is over, and Kei was basically able to, well, steal the points from Nishi. Get bent, you psychopath. Only, well, you'll see. As Kato tends to a badly stricken Nishi, Kei remarks that they should have been sent back already, right? They notice that more of the little birds are still running around, and the Bozoku attempt to stop them, because of course they do. Hojo, as it so happens, has a spare radar unit, and it appears there is something else they need to kill before Gantz will send them back. The little birds don't count at all. However, Nishi is not doing well, begging Gantz to take him back immediately, saying that he doesn't want to die, and, well, he does exactly that. And this bit is genuinely harrowing. Before he croaks, he tells Kato that if someone reaches 100 points, they will be freed. Then, the toughest guy in Gantz dies in front of them, choking on his own blood, teeth, and ruptured organs, and crying for his mother. Bloody hell, Oku, that was rough. Kei, watching this, realizes that, yeah, he's affected, but not anywhere near as badly as last time. He is starting to get used to death. Of course, the party immediately starts freaking out. The young grandson in hysterics, the Bozoku threatening him, trying to make him shut up. We get some information recapped. They can't leave the zone until they finish the hunt, and they must finish the hunt before the timer reaches 0. So most of the hunters head off in search of the last target. However, realizing that he's actually in the major poo, Kei is cornered by the 2 surviving Bozoku, and they tell him to start walking. One of them has a suit, so there's no real way for him to fight back. And yeah, on a whim, they beat 7 shades of crap out of Kei and take his Y-gun, but he's able to quietly conceal the X-pistol as they force him up out of the canal area and onto the streets at gunpoint. Meanwhile, The hunters head to the radar-indicated location, and sure enough, they find a second Tanaka, and a third, and a fourth coming from behind, and finally a fifth one from above. Oh dear. Yeah, there are 5 of these bastard things in all now. Kato tackles one and tells the others to do as he does. Squeeze them out of the suits, let them die in our atmosphere. But it all starts going badly wrong. Kato gets hit by 4 blasts at the same time, breaking his suit much like Nishi's, and Kishimoto gets knocked back when she tries to help. Kato is, at least, able to take one of them out, and Kishimoto bags another one herself by shooting it from behind, blowing it and its own suit to bits in a shower of guts, metal, and feathers. Hojo kills a third, and the remaining 2 leave in pursuit of the grandmother and her kid. Yeah, this is another sequence that YouTube would probably not be okay with. It's also pretty damn warped, even though we don't see all that much of it, but suffice to say, despite her trying to shield him with her body, both the grandmother and her grandson die horribly. Yeah, Gantz is not playing around. We never see the kill shot on him, but we do see the aftermath later, and that's 1 dead kid and 1 dead old lady. Back with the main group, the last of the birds suffocates, reaffirming that they cannot survive in our air and need those suits to breathe. Well, 2 left I guess, and they head off, sadly too late to help the 2 hunters who fled. Meanwhile, Kei is being forced to scout for the 2 Bozoku, as their radar says there's an alien nearby in a set of dingy apartments. After a mild argument, Kei realizes that he has no choice and heads inside, saying, "This is pretty funny. These must be apartments for foreigners." Okay, so renting a house or a flat in Japan isn't as simple as it is in the West. And as a foreigner, it can be nearly bloody impossible now, let alone 20 plus years ago. See, almost nobody will rent property to ye old gaijin for, I've never understood the reason. And those that will are either massive scammers, overpriced, short-term hostel or house-sharing type affairs, or something a bit worse than tenements. To rent a regular apartment or a house, even if you can find a landlord willing to take on a foreigner, not all that common. You will be expected to find a Japanese guarantor, someone to sign your contract with you, and who will be responsible if you turn out to be Jack the Ripper and flee the country, I guess. And this can't just be any old person. They must be professional, in good repute, with a paying job, and not your family member, which is naturally really frigging difficult. It's like finding someone to co-sign a loan. And even if you can find this, expect to be raked over the coals when it comes to rent and deposits, including a hefty key money or rake-in, cash you pay at the start of your stay at an apartment, generally framed as damage insurance, but in actuality is closer to one of Japan's many semi-formalized and legitimized bribes. Now, I will say that this situation is better out in the country, generally because you can find a landlord or 2 who are desperate to rent to basically anyone with a pulse, as many, if not most, apartment complexes or groups of rental houses are half empty due to the mass exodus towards the cities. Even then though, you'll need that guarantor, but it might be worth it because some of these houses are pretty damn amazing. I mean, I lucked out and was able to rent a full house practically on the beach for about $300 a month. Granted, this was a decade ago and my workplace had to sign on as well. In big cities, at least at the turn of the century, it was pretty wretched. So what specifically is Kei talking about here? Well, back then, foreign workers mostly stayed in unofficially designated foreigner apartment blocks. These were essentially their only option, and were horrible. For one, they were expensive, and beyond that, they were incredibly poorly maintained to the point of being almost slum-like, and at times, well, actually incredibly dangerous. They had very few amenities and were pretty miserable all told. And on top of this, your landlord would constantly be trying to gouge extra money out of you via threats of eviction or cutting your utilities. Not nice. I'm actually still racking my brains for the name of the big company that owned most of the big foreign worker flat blocks, but I remember hearing endless stories about how crap they were from my friends working in the cities. However, I will say that in the last decade or so, things have improved somewhat by means of simple competition over the rapidly growing expat and foreign worker populations in the larger metropolitan cities, as well as government mandates to improve internationalization, with accommodation for foreigners slowly becoming a cottage industry of its own, albeit not the best quality or value-wise even now, and if anything, even more infested with scammers. Yeah, it still sucks, and you'll still need a guarantor, but at least employers have become a bit more savvy on this and generally understand that they will need to help their foreign workers to find a place to rent. And outside of said scams, very few of these are the slums that were once your only option. Anyways, as Kei walks through the building, he begins seeing the tiny, horrible birds wandering around, before doors begin to open and he's absolutely surrounded by Tanakas. Only these make no move to attack and instead simply surround him as the door at the end of the hall opens and reveals something huge, barely visible in the gloom. More Tanakas arrive and begin saying all kinds of weird Tanaka Seiji lines, lyrics and catchphrases, and Kei tries to remain still and unobtrusive, but these smaller birds begin chewing on his neck in a genuinely agonizing way, drawing blood and leading him to drag one off, angering the Tanakas and causing, oh yeah, that's the boss bird, to look around. Again, this is why I say that solo leveling and quite a few other isekais, or I guess reverse ikais of that nature, are heavily inspired by Gantz, as this will be our structure for the next while, at least during hunts. We'll have smaller but still dangerous enemies, sometimes a mini-boss or two, and finally a boss alien that tends to be completely overpowered. Now, surrounded by a wall of death, Kei thinks of a plan, and it's kind of a humdinger. Meanwhile, the other Gantz hunters close in on another signal. If this area doesn't look familiar to you, it's where the grandmother and the grandkid died. In a surprising bit of restraint from Oku, we don't actually see the kid's corpse close up, but I can confirm both of these are 100% dead here. Horrified, Hojo, Kato, and Kishimoto do manage to fight and take out the two Tanakas. We switch back to Kei's perspective, who is about to either get blasted or eaten by the Tanakas and the boss respectively, but we finally get to see his desperate plan. He fires repeatedly at the floor of the rundown apartment block, then several times at the walls. These collapse as the X-pistol shot detonate and he falls through. And then, as the rest go off, the entire building begins to fall down around him. Yeah, remember when I said that the art gets better and that Oku's sense of scale and location is just great? This sequence is probably my first clear example of it. I mean, just look at his use of angled paneling and how it contributes to desperation and the sense of a rapidly collapsing building, culminating in this, one of my favorite double spreads early on in the manga, as the entire building essentially implodes, crushing down on the aliens, killing all the Tanakas as Kei dashes out in the nick of time, straight past two astonished Bozoku. They prepare to attack Kei. However, before they can do anything, the fat Bozoku is grabbed by huge talons and lifted into the air as the bird boss arrives and is then decapitated off panel as it bites off his head. Jeez. It lands again, this time menacing Hojo before sending him sprawling with a headbutt, and then it sets its sights on Kei. Before he can respond, it grabs him and flies him up into the sky in some more genuinely stunning panels. Believe it or not, as good as this is, the art actually gets exponentially better from here, by the way. Starting to see why I love this manga. As they fly, it repeatedly tries to bite him and tear off his head, and while he narrowly avoids it time and time again, you know, I have to wonder if this entire sequence is a nod to the absolutely brilliant battle at the end of the Lost Children arc from Berserk. You know, its most unadaptable story. Regardless, it finally grabs Kei's arm and leg and prepares to just bite him in half. Now, on the very edge of death, Kei remembers what they've learned about these creatures. He reaches up and just manages to yank out the device embedded in its mouth, and it immediately begins to freak out, suffocate, and plummet towards the ground. It flings him down, and as he falls, Kei aims up and blows it apart with the X-pistol. Holy crap, that was amazing! And yes, almost all the fights moving forward are at least this good, and most are way better. Just wait until Hunt 3, that's all I'm saying. And yeah, Kei is victorious. But what will happen next? Well, let's take a look. Kei lands hard on his back on a roof which, yeah, no, dead, but whatever. And while he does look a bit worse for the wear, and not especially happy to see Kishimoto glomped onto Kato again, he's relieved to see them beginning to be transported back. While they did lose several members, more survived this time. The Bozoku leader, Hojo, assumedly Sadako, and our three main characters. The scoring is also fairly impressive, as Kishimoto, Kato, and Hojo, who the orb sarcastically calls Homo, yeah, thank you early 2000s, get a handsome reward of 5 to 10 points apiece. They are all utterly stunned, however, when they see that Kei got a ridiculously high score of 38 points, a reward for him killing several Tanakas, the boss, and escaping with only superficial injuries by pure luck and a desire to survive. That's awesome. However, as Kishimoto begins hinting to Kato that she would actually like to come and live with him, Kei realizes that he's actually still really unhappy, as jealousy begins to grow in him. And that ends the second hunt, and we start out on the intermission before the absolute doomsday that is Hunt 3. After this, yeah, I'm going to be honest here, this intermission is one of the weakest parts of the manga, although there are still one or two interesting things that arise. First up, we see a somewhat friend-zoned and lonely Kei, lying in bed with Kishimoto sleeping on the floor now. By the way, this is not an uncommon arrangement in Japan, even between married couples. He's frankly deservedly proud of himself for surviving the battle with the bird boss without a suit, but he's desperately trying to impress Kishimoto by bragging, and all she can do, however, is extol Kato's virtues, and this causes Kei to get more and more irritated, especially when she says that there's nobody like Kato, and this causes him to completely erupt at her, accusing her of just using him and telling her that if she loves Kato so much, why the hell doesn't she go and stay with him instead? To his horror, she calls his bluff, apologizes, genuinely thanks him for everything he's done for her, and leaves immediately. Kei freezes, then dashes outside to apologize, but nope. Too late, she's gone. Ugh, damn man. This is, I will admit, another bit that people don't like, but you know, it's grown on me. Think of it this way. Even though he is starting to show signs of the man that he will one day become, Kei is, when you get down to the brass tacks, still a middle teenager. And those of us who recall being that age, well, I know that I had at least one incident where I really fancied a girl. I might well have had a shot, but the second she started talking about another guy, I turned into a salty, jealous little doucher and drove her away. This is what I mean. Kei is not always a likable character, and he can be a very frustrating one, but he is extremely well written if you can get into the teenage boy headspace. Teenagers can be dumb, mean, petty, and sometimes lash out without good reason. And while they do feel guilty later, it's sometimes too late. This is, yet again, a learning experience for Kei. Anyway, later, we see Kei at school, and we actually start getting some more insights into his, well, everything. Outside of something bad that happened with his family, a big part of his deeply rooted insecurities is that he's just not very good at anything. He's not a terrible athlete, but there are many kids better than him. He's not a terrible student, but not amazingly bright either. He's just a dude, a basic dude, an unremarkable dude, and he feels invisible and alone. Yeah, teenager. Later, we see him ruminating on the hunts and the crazy stuff he's achieved. Beating the onion alien hand to hand, beating the bird boss without his suit, and he realizes that now he really wants to go back into Gantz. Maybe Nishi wasn't too far from the mark after all. One thing that's interesting here is that while he was hesitant to kill anything, when put on the ropes by the bird boss, he actually killed it without any hesitation. Yeah, Kei's developing, and perhaps not into the nicest character either. And that's something else to keep in mind. Not all progress is positive, and not all growth is linear or in a good direction. Again, it's subtle, but sort of awesome. A few days later, the surviving Bozoku member, who had taken his X-pistol out of the game, uses it to murder his loan shark, giving us, yeah, if this looks familiar, this panel would later turn into a pretty popular meme. Yeah, that one. Although later, the Bozoku leader tries to use it on the gang that killed him and his friends, but this is too public a use of Gantz gear, causing his brain bomb to go off, and he dies from a massive internal rupture, to the complete astonishment of those around him. And yes, you might be able to hear Baby Owl in the background. Mrs. Owl is doing her best. Also, wouldn't just detonating the bomb cause more questions? Especially if there's some sort of autopsy? Kato, meanwhile, has found a new place for him and his little brother. If you recall, they are orphans and were taken in by their relatives. This is normal in Japan, in that relatives will be essentially forced by the government to take in children or even adults who are unable to care for themselves if the caregiver passes away. And yeah, this often results in a massive imposition, bad blood, and abuse. It's a very complicated scenario. Regardless, we learn that Kato has been squirreling away money and has at last found them a place in order to escape their abusive living situation. And yeah, if you watch my Uzumaki video, this is indeed one of the identical, almost prefab apartment blocks that you will find all over Japan, and these are fairly analogous to the Japanese row houses of yesteryear. I swear, this was my exact apartment for a good few years in Japan. It's eerie. I'm not kidding, the exact bloody same. And I think they're even staying in the exact room I used to. Anyway, Kato and his brother are actually really sweet. They're just way too wholesome. But we won't go into them too deeply. Feel free to go and read this manga yourself if you are interested. Suffice to say, Kato is doing everything he can to ensure that his little brother gets to go to a better school and have a better life than he had. We see both him and Kei lying in bed that night. In their own beds respectively, don't get any ideas. Kei's alone, fantasizing about Kishimoto, and Kato is spending time with his brother. One wishes that the next hunt would begin already, and the other hopes that it never happens. Sure enough though, the teleportation starts, and this sends us into Hunt 3. We rejoin Kei standing in the Gantz room, except that, in an interesting contrast to Kato, he's raring to go, and this time not wanting a repeat of Hunt 2, and despite the chuckles of the newcomers, he's already fully suited. Kei has found his thing. Oh right, we will get to know the new folks pretty fast, and some of them will be at least mildly important, so let's get a few of them out of the way. First up, Tokugawa, a heavily built Buddhist priest. He's bickering with this seedy-looking man over what exactly is happening here. Essentially, Tokugawa is trying to convince everyone that they've died. Well, he's not wrong, and that this room is a waiting room before they can all proceed to the afterlife. Limbo, essentially. Now, I am not going to be going into Buddhism too deeply here. It's a world-spanning religion, and its history and practices are outside of the scope of my silly little manga channel, let alone Japan's own idiosyncratic version, existing as an odd and occasionally uneasy fusion of Buddhist and Shinto doctrines. But he's an interesting character for a few reasons. Firstly, he's foreshadowing the primary theme of Hunt 3, which will be Buddhist iconography of all things. And secondly, priests in Japan are really interesting. I don't think I've ever met a raging fundamentalist like Tokugawa in the wild. Most of the ones I met were really chill and often modern dudes. Hell, the chap in our village used to DJ on Friday nights at a weekly event up in the city, his own EDM music. Yeah, rural Japan is wild. Oh, and we scan through the other characters, from top right to bottom left. First up, a chubby guy in army fatigues. A lot of folks think that he's an SDF soldier, but I've been digging a little deeper, and according to Oku, he's only pretending. In actuality, he's a hikikomori. I've talked about this in other videos. If you want to know more, I would go and watch my Lollipop or a Buddhist series. Honestly, do that anyway, it's pretty good if I do say so myself. But let's just say shut in. He's obsessed with firearms and military games, and amusingly enough, he died choking to death on junk food while playing video games. Yeah, subtle, Oku. Over on the left is JJ. If you've seen the anime, he's easily one of the best parts, albeit unintentionally. He's supposed to be an American martial artist, but the voice actor they hired apparently didn't speak English, and this leads to some amazing reads. Go and check it out. I can't find anything more specific, but if I recall, he's based on a King of Fighters character. Let me know in the comments if you know who he's based on. Bottom right is Sei, aka... alright, so old farts like me will immediately notice who she's based on, but you youngsters might not. Sei is clearly a reference to Kim Campbell, the well-known and beloved former Prime Minister of Canada. Nah. Of course, it's frigging Lara Croft. From the old Tomb Raider games, and I guess the remaster, and the recent Dead by Daylight collaboration, I'm amazed just how strong Tomb Raider's still going as a series. But this is particularly Angelina Jolie's portrayal of her from the original Tomb Raider movies. You know, the ones that kicked as many young men into puberty as Michelle Pfeiffer in Batman Returns did for my generation. She was actually completely changed in the anime, much like the Tanaka alien for fear of copyright issues. Remember, Japan has no such thing as fair use or a parody exception. Regardless, allegedly, Sei died after being shot to death by an angry suitor that she rejected after a fighting tournament because of course she did. Finally, an unassuming young man wearing glasses named Miyafuji. We never find anything out about this guy, which is weird, as he's not exactly unimportant to the plot. You'll see what I mean. The stragglers start beaming in. Kato, who does not look happy to be here. Contrast this with Kei. Hojo, who they still call Homo. Yeah, sorry folks. This is a manga from another time. Sadako, and finally Kishimoto. Kei's heart naturally skips a beat, and he looks pretty hangdog, but he's also relieved to see her. Only, she blows straight past him and runs up to Kato. Yeah, Kei, you threw her out. What did you expect? Kei's expression, you know when I said that Oku really captures what it's like to be a teenage boy? The good and the bad? That expression right there sums it up perfectly. A wonderful combination of solipsistic resentment, unrequited longing, and pure lime green jello. Yeah, Kei is not a happy camper at all. Tokugawa continues to basically try to convert those present, saying that they are being tested, and if they don't chant a sutra with him, they will fall into hell. Again, are there Buddhists like this? I don't know. Kei, however, isn't having it, and tells everyone that this place has nothing to do with religion. Tokugawa tries to argue, saying that Kato is a demon sent to tempt them at the last minute, but he stands strong, a perfect party leader. And yeah, Kishimoto is well into it. However, it doesn't exactly work, as most of the hunters, rather than donning their suits and listening to Kato, begin chanting the sutra. He tries to figure out what to do, but Kei, realizing that any chance he might have had with Kishimoto is shot, quietly slips out and starts to break down in the corridor. Yeah, while he's a bit of a wet hen, nah, that doesn't work for guys, does it? A wet car, no, I can't say that on YouTube and it's gonna sound weird anyway. He's just a bit of a wimp, I guess, but I do genuinely feel bad for him here. Remember, Gantz is, at its core, a coming-of-age story, and it's not half a bad one. We'll talk more about this in Hunt 4. However, this next bit, it sort of flew under the radar for a long time, I guess, but it's now considered really problematic. Why? Well, Kei is having a bit of a bubble where he thinks no one can hear him. Only to his horror, he sees that Sei, the Tomb Raider lady, is watching him with mild curiosity. Ouch. They actually get to talking, and she asks him, if he's an otaku. This is a term you might have heard before, although it has kind of fallen out of vogue in the last decade. It's quite similar to the way we use nerd, weirdly enough, but it's not exactly the same. Its modern usage dates back to the early 80s, and its origins are highly disputed, but allegedly, This was an obscure term to do with bookish types and comic collectors in the 60s and 70s, but then it got used in the Macross anime and was slightly popularized there. Otaku culture, at least in the manner it existed at the time Gantz was being written, is generally viewed as rising out of the start of Japan's real troubles during the lost decades, as a sort of counter-movement to the rise of what's loosely referred to as Nampa culture, young men in their 20s and 30s basically spending all their free time and money aggressively trolling for sex. Instead, otaku found that information technology and the nascent emergence of huge geek subcultures like the Gundam franchise offered a refuge from what young men and some women found to be a stressful and hollow lifestyle. That said, while the term was initially innocuous, as well as briefly fashionable due to articles written in everyday life magazines, it became used as a pejorative with a lot of hatred and disdain attached, as these feelings crept out towards the idea of otaku from society at large, even people who otherwise enjoyed manga and anime. Part of this was likely due to a popular essayist writing in Manga Buriko, there's a hole we won't go down today, bloody hell, who used it as a slang term for overweight, sloppy-looking manga fans with crappy hygiene and no social skills. Part of it was articles written in contemporary knowledge magazines, but in particular, the term developed its negative inference due to the widespread media coverage of Tsutomu Miyazaki, the so-called otaku serial killer. And this led to otaku being viewed as weird, undesirable, childish, and socially unwanted, much like the geeks and nerds were in the West. However, while being an otaku in the late 90s and early 2000s, which is when this was written, was basically vagina repellent, it's not exactly like that anymore. Much as with nerd culture in the West, otaku culture in Japan is now weirdly fashionable for both boys and girls, with trendy celebrities doing cosplay, reading anime, and talking about their favorite video games, which some older otaku are mildly resentful of, as in their minds, these newcomers have taken over their subculture while driving them out, and never having earned their stripes. Meanwhile, and yeah, this is Oku once again being a weirdly good writer. While Kei denies that he's an otaku, Sei, by means of body language and also what she says, reveals that she's kind of into nerds, and is also very likely a brocon. Okay, without getting too icky, let's just say that this term refers to a woman, generally in her late teens, early 20s, or even early 30s, who is drawn to younger brother-ish guys. Yeah, Japan is Japan, and you can see where this is all going. Back over with Kato, he's struggling to convince the others to suit up, but as he's actually not stupid, he tells them that the sphere is going to start playing music soon, and sure enough, it does. He thus is able to convince some of them at least to put it on. We then see our targets, and if you know a few things about Japan, you can probably place this hunt already. Maybe we will get to that later. A few of them do suit up and arm up at least. Meanwhile, Kei just comes right out with it and asks Sei if she wants to bump uglies. Well, dude, you've got balls. She's taken aback, but as you can probably guess, is keen. There is no way I can show you what follows, even censored, but in a nutshell, they get down to business right there in the corridor. All the positions. Kishimoto walks in on them exchanging fluids, and Kei basically rubs it in her face.
Hey, phrasing!
Now yeah, let's just get this out of the way. The reason this is a controversial pairing is because Kei is around 16 and Sei is 26, which yes, is pretty damn gross. Although to be fair, it wasn't quite as societally unacceptable back then, especially in Japan, and especially in cases where the woman is the one that is older. I will say that my take on this is a bit more charitable though. Remember, a lot of Gantz comes down to being a heightened version of what it's like to be a teenage boy, especially a teenage boy in that era, rather than any sort of accurate societal representation. And most teenage boys I knew in the era probably would have escaped into fantasies involving them getting de-virginized by Angelina Jolie after being rejected by their crush. Does that make sense? I don't know. I will leave this one up to you. Regardless, having lost his cherry, Kei comes out looking like the cock of the walk, with his new, smoking hot bird at his side, basically glowing. This will come back around in a big way later on. Again, it's good writing despite these two being all sorts of ugh. And yes, don't worry, it's nearly time for the hunt. Kato, Hojo, and the rest of the survivors of Hunt 2 suit up, and Sei does too, giving us lots of explicit boob shots as she does, because Hiroya Oku is a horny bastard. Kato wants to try again to convince the rest to get them on, but Hojo says bugger 'em, let them die. More points for us lot. An almost Nishi-esque perspective, interestingly enough. Kato responds that the more of them that can contribute to the hunt, the better their chances are of coming back alive. It is interesting how mercenary Kei is going to become, while Kato remains this pure-hearted leader. Once again, a very interesting contrast. Oh right, there's one more character tucked away in a corner, keeping to himself. He does look like he means business though, whatever he's doing. And mild spoilers, his name is Togo, and if that sounds familiar or his design rings a bell, he is indeed heavily based on the titular character from Golgo 13, a pretty damn good and stupidly long-running series. No, seriously, this thing is twice as long as One Piece, not kidding, and despite the author's death, as far as I know, it's still going. Cliff notes, it's about a hitman sniper who often goes by the alias Togo. Yeah, Hunt 3 is just overflowing with pop culture references and nods. I probably won't catch them all, so if I miss one, I am interested to see what you come up with in the comments. Kato does convince a few more to get their suits on, but the priest, the pimp, JJ, Togo, and a few others refuse, until Kato demonstrates the power of the suit by lifting them bodily, one in each hand, with complete ease, in one of the many panels this time around that makes me grin. That's a pretty effective little lesson. Regardless, the beaming begins, and just like that, Hunt 3 is on, and yeah, they have no idea what they're in for this time. They arrive with their targets right in front of them, and people familiar with Japan, especially older tourist sites, may be able to guess where they are immediately. For everyone else, let me explain. These two huge statues are Neo, extremely powerful warriors that reflect the more militant aspects of Buddhism and both a stance against and protection from the forces of evil. You see them more in China and India from my understanding. However, these two Neo statues are incredibly distinctive in Japan. Combine this with the door and everything else, and it indicates that we're probably standing at the entrance to Todaiji Temple Grounds, a famous and ancient set of structures located in Nara Prefecture, home to many old temples, lovely nature, gorgeous women, ancient castles, and gigantic aggressive horned rats that some people call the Nara deer. No, seriously, these things are a long story. We may get to them in another video. Anyways, Todaiji is a famous place, made in imitation of Chinese temples of the era. It dates back over 1,000 years, and it played a crucial and central role in the early adoption and regulation of Buddhism within Japan, as well as its often uneasy reconciliation with and integration of Shinto practices and beliefs, back when it was a curated state religion. Also, folks who have visited this temple may know what waits inside, and yeah, I won't spoil it for now. Anyways, you should know the words to the song by now. One hunter attempts to leave the zone and gets their head kaploded. They use their scanners to ascertain that these things are indeed flesh and blood, and not just statues. Spoiler, yup. And that's just, ugh. Do these things sit around all day doing nothing? Do they poo? Because you'd think you'd hear about that on the news. I don't know why, but this idea of huge, hostile living things basically just sitting out in public and waiting for something creeps me right the hell out. It's very Masaki Nakayama in its way. Sure enough, the Guardian statues begin to awaken, and Kato rallies his troops, telling them that they are about to enter a desperate fight for their lives, to rely on the suits, to use their guns, cover each other, and don't be stupid. Kato prepares to fire on one with the Y gun, as in, why the hell bother? Seriously, until the plot needs them to work, these things are about as useful as tits on a fire truck. Regardless, its mate busts out of the wooden scaffolding and moves into attack. Remember when I said that the art in Gantz does get really bloody good after a certain point? I think that Hunt 3 is that point, and it really does just get more and more awesome from here. Occasionally wobbly CGI integrations accepted. Caught out of position, the hunters rush forward and enter the gates, with the two utterly huge monsters in hot pursuit, and they find themselves on the temple grounds. But one swings, and the sheer force of the blow knocks most of them off their feet. The priest tries praying, but while it temporarily distracts one, it then just reaches over and splats him against the concrete in a great big spray of blood. I know that ironic comeuppances are another of Oku's favorite things, but despite this guy being a bit of a knob, I don't think he really deserved that. Ah well, these things are nasty as hell, and this is going to be a fight. Let's see how they handle it. Meanwhile, under Kato's leadership, the hunters are actually doing okay against the Neo, and after a tussle, they succeed in blowing the weaker of the two's foot off in a spectacularly explicit shower of blood and bone. Yeah, as mentioned, while I am going to be a touch more daring in terms of what I can show, there is still a lot here that no, sorry. However, as the fight progresses, they start getting pushed pretty hard. These things do not mess around and make the Tanakas look positively tame by comparison. Do note here, Kato is already hammering them into a cohesive squad, and without this, they'd probably already be street pizza. We are seeing character growth here, as well as some power creep, except that the latter is not coming from transformations or heavy training. Instead, it's coming from experience, leadership, and teamwork, and I really dig that. However, despite their best efforts, Things steadily go more and more pear-shaped, with even Kato at a loss as to how to win here. While their weapons do seem effective, it's not like the Tanakas, where one clean shot will kill the alien. These things are big, tough, and their attacks are so strong that they set off shockwaves, knocking everyone around. I am not going to gush too much this time around Oku's paneling, but I just love how much fun he has with it. It's something to note as you go through it. You'll go from a gorgeous multi-panel run to several huge single pages to a gobsmacking double spread and back again, and it's just so friggin' cool, man. Sadly, the scans all have those big page gaps in the center. Go and check it out for yourself. You will see how good this manga looks. Thinking of his brother and their new place, Kato resigns himself to some sort of suicidal charge, only for Kei to dash forward out of nowhere like a mad bastard, slide between its legs, a nice little callback to his favorite childhood move, and blows both of its feet off. As it falls onto its arms, Kei is ready, guns akimbo, and blows those off too like an absolute frigging boss. Why haven't you bought this manga already? Finally, and yeah, another cool character beat that I didn't notice before. Kei hesitates before taking the kill shot, likely thinking of Nishi. As mentioned earlier, this weird psychotic character will honestly loom large over the manga right up until the end. We will get there. But it makes sense. It's one thing to blow the bird boss apart in hot blood and in the middle of a life or death battle, but this thing is helpless. However, Kei is becoming hardened and resigns himself to it. He knows that this is what Gantz requires, and then he blows its head off. Sorry, can't show you much of this at all. These are some of those panels that, even if I censored them, there wouldn't be much left to see anyway. Go and buy this thing if you want all the blood and tits and bums, and the occasional minge. There's your word for the day, by the way. Regardless, the hunters are astonished, but now rally. These things do seem to be killable, especially if you have testicles the size of a damn hippity-hop. Kei, however, doesn't bloody stop there. He charges the second one with everyone running after him. I swear, there needs to be a poor Frodo in here somewhere. And as he does, we see his thoughts. Bollocks to his mundane everyday life. In here, he's awesome. Which, yep, I'm not gonna argue. It does try to put up a fight, attempting to buffet them around again, but as a counter, Kei uses the suit to punch into the ground. Are you kidding me? And before they can tangle, its head suddenly explodes. What? We see the cause. It's Togo, sniping at it from a roof far away. Yeah, unlike last time, there are some decent fighters in this lot, and this guy rules. We get another fun panel as Kei walks past Kishimoto pretty deliberately, heading for his new bird Sei. Again, anyone who remembers being a teenage boy will probably know exactly what he's trying to do here, but for those who aren't gigantic jerks, he is still really keen on Kishimoto and is kind of just using Sei to try and attract her attention by means of sheer jealousy, a ploy that I'm sure has worked at least a dozen times throughout the entirety of human history. Sei, in turn, however, she's super keen on him. Lady, you're 26. This is not okay. Yes, teenage fantasies, but oh, Japan. Regardless, she tells him that she wants him to go out with her and implies that she wants to make squishy with him in the backseat of her car as soon as they're done. Kato, more observant, spots Togo, who tells him that he's amazed that so many Gantz hunters are adamant that they want to go in and brawl and, don't just snipe their targets from miles away. The X-Rifle has an incredible range, is wonderfully accurate once you get a feel for it, and it can really mess things up. However, on top of another nearby structure that I think is supposed to be Koku Fuji, a famous and extremely tall pagoda in Nara, there's a much smaller but no less intimidating Buddhist statue that, okay, I'm not going to talk about every single statue here. If anyone wants to do them in the comments, that'd be cool and I might just pin you, but this video is already going to be way too long. The smaller statue attacks, but before the fight can really get going, JJ notices that there are about half a dozen of the things all heading towards them from Kokufuji. Yikes. These things aren't horribly strong, but there are rather a lot of them, and then, suddenly, there is an enormous wrenching crash from the main temple building, and folks who have visited Todaiji should know exactly what's coming. They stare in horror as an absolutely gigantic Buddha statue emerges, and once it stands to its full height, this thing absolutely dwarfs even the Neo. This has to be a boss, right? And this big bugger is quite something. Although I will admit that while the CGI does create a weird uncanny valley effect that sometimes works, it also sometimes doesn't. But as to the creature itself, well, this is going to take some explaining, and that means it's time for a tangent. So, this monstrosity is what causes a lot of the arguments regarding where exactly this arc takes place, and okay, I get it. The temple is, at least in part, clearly inspired by Todaiji, and this creature does confirm it, meaning that Hunt 3, at least to me, pretty conclusively takes place in Nara, which means that the teleporter has quite some range to it. See, Todaiji does indeed contain an incredibly famous statue, the Daibutsu or Great Buddha of Nara, an absolute unit of an artifact, almost 15 meters tall and nearly double that across, weighing a frankly obscene amount of tons. As a truly bizarre aside, a while back for some reason they x-rayed the thing and they discovered a human tooth and a bunch of very old artifacts inside the statue's knee, which are allegedly relics of the Shomu era, dating back to the temple's construction over 1,000 years ago. Yeah, in an alternate reality, this statue does actually come to life and kill us all. However, while I do still think it's 100% Nara, where argument arises is that this creature is way bigger than the Nara Daibutsu and is also formed, well, kind of differently, more tall than wide. It does, in fact, more closely resemble the Great Buddha of Kotokuin, a similarly famous temple in Kamakura, which I guess has led some Gantz fans to believe that Hunt 3 takes place in Kamakura Prefecture instead. This is just one of those weird things in Japan. Some places just have giant statues, ranging from merely enormous to frigging kaiju-sized. No, seriously, that is not a Photoshop, and I nearly pooped myself when I went to visit a mate in Miyagi Prefecture and saw this thing looming out of the fog. The gigantic cannon of Sendai is another bizarre rabbit hole to go down, and we won't be going down it today. Just Google it. It's quite something. I honestly don't know why some of the more recent ones were built. Again, it's just a thing. So yeah, as to the debate, in my opinion, Oku is just having a bit of fun and creating a pastiche. In regards to Buddhist iconography and ancient sites within Japan, the temple is Todaiji in Nara, but some stuff is moved around, and he also borrows the Great Buddha from Kamakura, as the Nara one would probably have looked a little bit goofy. Anyways. The titanic creature emerges from the temple like a size 12 clown from a size 2 car. Kei grits his teeth and prepares to go in on the thing, but Sei stops him. telling him that doing so would be completely insane. She's not wrong, as sure enough, he fires and manages to scratch its foot, realizing that nope, they are going to need a bigger gun. As mentioned, the Buddha is CGI and it looks okay mostly, with the occasional janky as hell composite, but I just have to point out how well Oku does manage to capture location, scale, and movement. I mean, as you go through this thing, if there is any point where you don't know who or what is where, it's probably deliberate at that point in the story. Yeah, this manga is that good. Just look at this sequence as an example, where Kei learns that disparaging the boot is a bootable offense, and gets kicked the length of the temple grounds. We can still tell how far he flew and roughly where he landed. It might not be as easy to tell from the slightly truncated video, but you'll see what I mean when you read Gantz. The art is like Yusuke Murata amazing, especially when you factor in this many perspectives. Kato, yet again, rallies the troops, trying to get them into some sort of viable attacking formation, shooting down the trash from a distance, and then focusing fire on the boss's feet. Oh right, there's this sort of extended side objective where the temple owner arrives and thinks it's been vandalized. He then walks around with the Gantz crew trying to defend him from the huge boss and the ads, which he cannot see. It's mostly played for laughs, but as it's generally pointless, we will skip most of it, aside from one seriously cool moment later on. Do note though, this is kind of important. The creatures being hunted are slowly but surely exerting more and more of an effect on the wider world. And this is actually going somewhere, as you will see in Act 2. Oh right, speaking of bosses and seriously cool shit, Kato tries to get everyone up again, but Kei looks like he has something to prove. He tells everyone to stand back. The boss is his. Kato looks at him with a sudden weird sort of respect, saying that it finally feels like the Kei he knew as a kid has returned. Meanwhile, the suitless Gantz hunters are taking on the ads, with JJ kicking serious ass barehanded, and Togo basically carrying them with his sniping. Oh, and that awesome bit I told you about? Well, the boss is about to step on the temple owner, but Kato, Kishimoto, Hojo, and Sadako work in coordination to save him, using the power of the suits to literally hold the Buddha's foot up in the air, even as it starts driving them into the concrete like nails. Yes, the manga constantly waffles on how powerful the suits are, and this may be one of perhaps 3 moments in the manga where they do seem suitably powerful, but damn it, that's cool. Honestly, even cooler in its way. Hojo finally gets a good look at Sadako and realizes that, yeah, for a weird stalker type, she's actually insanely beautiful, and he falls head over heels for her. I'll take things that'll never happen for 500, Alex, but it's still an oddly endearing moment. I will happily admit that I am a sucker for schmaltzy mid-battle moments like this. They're just fun. They do survive without their suits breaking somehow, and Kei stares the boss down, saying that, well, it's time he got started. This is hype as balls. Let's frigging go. Kei starts by firing a concentrated volley at the thing's head and shoulders, giving it a number of small wounds and narrowly avoiding its counterattack. He also hits it on the forehead, giving it an Irma, sort of the Buddhist version of the bindi, and yet another rabbit hole that we're not going down today. Yes, Oku, that's sort of funny, I guess. This, however, really pisses it off, and it stops walking around and starts running after Kei in, this panel is hilarious. See, Oku, this is actually funny. While Kei is able to escape, the chubby gun nut gets nabbed and partially eaten in a spectacularly gross way. However, Kei is not done yet. He powers up his suit, then kicks off the ground with enough force to shatter the concrete, firing himself towards the boss. There's a brief splash of blood, and he vanishes, much to the obvious confusion of those below. Then, the Buddha begins to spurt blood from its eyes, nose, and ears, sinks to the ground, holding its head, and dies. Of course, because narrative causality, its mouth falls open, and out steps a bloody but victorious Kei. Get this, he entered through the wound on its forehead and blew its brains apart from the inside like a damn jet-propelled zergling. Have I mentioned that I love this manga? The other hunters are absolutely flabbergasted, and yeah, looks like Sei's sporting quite the wide-on watching Kei being Sungjin Woo levels of amazing. No, seriously. Solo leveling and quite a few other angsty power fantasy isekais absolutely do have some of Gantz DNA in their heritage. However, despite the boss being dead, they aren't getting teleported out, and Kato reasons that one of these smaller ads must have hidden away somewhere. Kind of like the last two survivors in my recent Dead by Daylight games, seriously nerf distortion, but they realize that they need to find it before the timer runs out. He tells them all to split up into two groups, and for Togo to stay up in his perch and snipe anything that they manage to flush out. And yes, if you hear any weird noises in the background, Baby Owl is up and about and being adorable. We also get a really well executed little character beat as they dash off, where Kato asks Kei if he and Sei are going out. Take note of this as it's quite subtle. Kei doesn't answer and instead glances over at Kishimoto. Sei, however, says, "Hell yeah, absolutely. Oh boy." Meanwhile, Hojo, Sadako, and the three unsuited hunters head into another temple nearby, and Hojo actually starts flirting with a pretty shy but honestly adorable Sadako. And once they're in, oh hell, they find 5 statues. 4 really intimidating looking smaller ones with, okay, we will be going with Kanon for now, but we will explain that in just a bit in the center. And yeah, this notorious bastard thing is a fan favorite. You will see why. Hojo suggests that they kill these remaining trash mobs and call it a day. So JJ, ready to kick some ass, approaches one of the outer statues. This one strongly resembling Bishamon, one of many Japanese war gods, not a Digimon, I swear. JJ punches it several times, resulting in his arm being broken. Keep in mind, he killed many of these smaller ads with his bare hands. Unperturbed, he then tackles Bishamon, but it appears to barely notice, as another of the 4 kills JJ by kicking his head mostly off. Holy crap! In a sudden and absolutely gnarly death. Oh bugger, these things are not weak. Meanwhile, outside, Kato's group finishes cleaning up the ads from earlier, and they prepare to head into the temple to see what's going on with Hojo's group. Inside, Sadako and Hojo go back to take on the 4 powerful statues, giving the 2 suitless chaps a chance to slip out. They do manage to take out 2 of the things despite getting disarmed, only to see that the central statue has gotten off its pedestal. In each of its many arms is a different weapon or artifact, and yeah, if you haven't already guessed, the giant Buddha was a mini-boss. This horrible frigging thing is the real boss. Only, to this day, there is quite a lot of rather interesting argumentation about this thing and what exactly it's a reference to. So, before we get into, well, spoilers, one of the best fights in a manga series full to the tits with awesome fights, let's do another quick tangent and explain just what the hell I think this thing is. Okay, so the boss of Hunt 3 and as far as I can recall, the final boss of both the anime and the video game is generally referred to as Kanon, although I don't know if it's ever referred to by this name in the manga. It may well be. Kanon is a commonly referenced Buddhist deity, widely represented by statues all over Japan, generally with a huge number of arms, each bearing some sort of religiously significant object. However, Kanon is a weird choice of influence for this nasty as hell boss monster, as Kanon is an incredibly benevolent deity, often taking the role of the goddess of mercy and compassion. While, sure, it's entirely possible that Oku is doing some sort of darkly ironic reversal here, there are other parts of this design that don't make sense. For starters, while Kanon is only sometimes given statue boobs, she is female. While this creature looks decidedly male, there are other details that seem weird. The crown, for one, seems to bear either faces or skulls. Ditto what looks like more faces on the sides of its head. These are not a canon thing, but they are traits of another deity, and yeah, this is where things get interesting. See, this leads me to believe, along with some other readers, that the statue is more likely to be another, far more obscure and bloodthirsty deity, Marisi. Marisi is, from what I can tell, a much more vicious piece of work, generally regarded as a god of war. It can be either male or female, with the female variant being slightly more benevolent and the male variant being much more warlike. Marisi has fewer arms than Kanon and carries weapons in each of them. And this is the key. He has 4 faces on the sides of his head and wears a crown covered with either faces or skulls, so yeah, I'm pretty confident in saying that this is Marisi, not Kanon. And so I am actually going to be referring to this thing as Marisi moving forwards, as I think it's far more accurate. Although, much like the whole Nara Kamakura thing, I suspect that both are somewhat correct, and that Oku has just created a pastiche. Anyways. As Kato and Ko make their way into the temple, we actually get a pretty endearing moment as we see Hojo and Sadako sharing a kiss. However, as they enter, we see, oh hell, we pan out and notice that both of them are dead in the middle of their first kiss. They've been cut in half. And yeah, no, this actually hits really frigging hard. I liked both of these characters a great deal, and I looked forward to learning more about them, especially Sadako. Damn it, Oku. Kato obviously feels the same way about this insanely nasty little twist death, and rushes in yelling. One of the guards kicks his Y-gun out of his hand, but he then draws his X-pistol and shoots Marisi in its stupid face. Hell yeah, Kato. Only a wheel-like artifact. Okay, so I went down a bit of a hole trying to identify all of Marisi's items and discovered that not only are they really tricky to pick apart, there is stuff in there that is just a wall of umlauts, and I am not even going to try and pronounce them on YouTube. If someone more knowledgeable about the faith wants to have a stab in the comments, I will pin it. Anyways, yeah, the wheel rotates and the creature instantly regenerates. Oh boy. Before he can respond, Marisi flicks water at him from its urn, and oh no, Kishimoto leaps in the way. And in one of the most iconic panels in the early manga, and one you've probably seen referenced in a dozen others, it turns out to be impossibly strong acid as Kei screams and Kishimoto looks up at Kato in pain and astonished horror. The acid eats her in half. Cheesy Pete, Oku, that was ruthless. Not only did we just lose 2 major side characters, we have lost a main character in the space of a few pages. What follows is one hell of a sequence, as a furious Kei leaps up and kicks Morisi square in the face, while a stricken Kishimoto finally tells Kato how she feels before passing away in his arms. Things turn into complete chaos for a while. Kei stands over Morisi and just unloads shot after shot into it. Sei, on the other hand, basically dances through the ads, demonstrating insane martial arts prowess, and yeah, I cannot overemphasize how much the art here kicks ass. Now, this next bit is a touch confusing, I'll admit, but what I think happens is that despite Kei blowing its head into jelly, of course it regenerates. And when I first read this, I thought that Kei's leg had gotten sucked into its body along with its returning flesh, but it actually looks like Morisi somehow got him in the leg with the acid, burning off his foot and most of his shin. Then it cuts off Kei's arm. What the blithering fuck is going on in this manga? Did we just kill the main character? Kei falls onto his back, dying and calling out for Kishimoto. Oof, Sei. And as he does, he recalls the good times they had together at his place. Sei is naturally quite unhappy hearing all of this, and worse yet, seeing the mortally wounded Kei begins to break down. However, she squares off against Morisi nonetheless. Kato kisses Kishimoto goodbye. Yeah, I can only imagine how that tastes, and yells for Sei to grab Kei and get outside, which she does, narrowly avoiding its acid. We then get an utterly harrowing sequence, which I cannot show you much of. Kei, in agony, begs them to finish him off. They were able to tourniquet his arm, but the acid continues to eat away at his leg, which they solve by using an X-pistol to blow off most of what remains. Remember, if they kill Morisi, then anyone who is still alive, no matter how close they were to death, will be fully restored back in the Gantz room. Nice of you to remind us of this, Oku. You really do know how to get my hopes up. But how? The thing is fast, strong, and has a wide array of devastating weapons. And yes, this is where we're fully establishing that sufficiently sharp slashing or stabbing implements like swords, or substances like acid, can basically go right through the suits. Quite a design flaw, honestly, but the worst part here is its regeneration. No matter how badly they damage it, it gets right back up. Kato, however, has an idea. Meanwhile, the 2 suitless, seedy-looking dudes attempt to fight Morisi, who cuts their hands off. But Togo, as the last line of defense, snipes the hell out of it, blowing its head, torso, and limbs apart. I'm only now remembering that Morisi might also be a Terminator 2 reference, as it just keeps regenerating. However, because it can't reach him, it unveils probably its strongest attack, a small lantern that emits a continuous high-powered laser that... This has to be a reference to the first Resident Evil film, right? You know, the one bit that anyone remembers from that movie. And yeah, chalk up the deaths of these 2. So, what the hell do they do now? As Kato retrieves his Y-gun, we see his plan, and it's not a bad one. The boss seems to be able to heal off any sort of damage nearly instantly, but it probably can't heal being teleported away. Sei and Kei have honestly one of the most heart-wrenching exchanges in the entire manga. Yeah, again, it might feel a bit pat when you read it the first time, but when you think about it, it actually works as a fantastic little character beat. Sei asks Kei if he cares about her at all, and he tells her that no, not really. He was in a bad place and thought that she'd sleep with him. Essentially, she was just a rebound lay and nothing more. Ouch. However, looking at Kei's character as a whole, if I were feeling charitable rather than my usual cantankerous and cynical self, this might be him trying to be noble and getting her to run, leaving him to his death. But instead, she asks him if he'd fall in love with her if she was able to beat Marisi. He declines to answer, so she basically says that she is going to do it and then he will go home with her after. I have no idea why, but this bit always gets me right in the feels. It makes me root for Sei and weirdly sympathize with Kei. And yeah, because she is awesome, Sei actually holds her own, not only dodging the blade and the laser, but smacks Marisi around, managing to remove most of its weapons and, best of all, kicks its acid back up onto it, seriously injuring the creature and, likely intentionally because I love Sei, destroys its regeneration wheel. And this absolute fist pump moment caps off Volume 7 in spectacular fashion. Volume 8 begins showing that Sei has indeed kicked every inch of this thing's ass. It is now furious and pretty badly injured, but it can't seem to land a hit on her. Yeah, I will risk showing this panel as its dope. Half-melted, organic alien statue monsters are okay, right, YouTube? Regardless, half of its arms are gone, as are the majority of its weapons. Sei tells Kei to hold on and prepares to finish it. Only, oh no. Oh seriously, come on. Out of nowhere, Marisi nails Sei with a laser, cutting her almost in half diagonally. She dies spraying blood and calling out for Kei because this manga wants to break my frigging heart at every turn. This is just... why? Marisi moves on, preparing to finish off Kei, only for Togo to burst out of the corpse of the huge Buddha and impale it with a trident. This manages to hurt it a fair bit before it finally succeeds in killing Togo, cutting off both of his legs and then sealing the deal with a beam through the noggin. Kato returns, finding everyone dead, aside from Kei, who looks like he's on his way out too. Worse yet, Kato realizes that he cannot afford to die here, otherwise his little brother will be left all alone to an uncertain future. He thus picks up a sword and prepares to do his best. Oh right, this is dumb. Miyafuji, remember the nerdy guy with the glasses? He figured out how to cloak, but the creature detects him and just lasers him apart before he can do anything. Lame. It also eats his brain, which, yeah, okay. This is where the hunt goes really weird. Eating the brain allows it to speak with Kato, claiming that it's Miyafuji, and okay, so it's time for some headcanon. I think that Marisi's whole deal is that it has no personality of its own, really. Instead, it builds a mind out of those it kills and eats. Kind of like the Hiver from Terry Pratchett's excellent Tiffany Aching saga. Rest in peace, man. Regardless, the creature now has Miyafuji's speech and also his mind, I guess. Except that once he's in the driving seat, Miyafuji immediately turns evil and says that he loves this new body. He is now going to do whatever the hell he wants to, first up, killing everyone present. Kato tries the Y-gun, but because this thing never works, it doesn't. Miyafuji tells Kato that whatever faint intelligence Marisi has wants to know why they came and attacked it. But this is just a cover for another onslaught. He absolutely batters Kato to the point of near death. However, it looks like Kato might have been taking the punishment deliberately to give him some kind of opening, as he finally manages to lock on and snare it with the Y-gun, losing an arm to the laser in the process. Miyafuji begins to plead for mercy, asking Kato if he is really going to kill him, and Kato, despite his gentle nature, realizes that there is no choice here. He has to go home alive to his little brother, and he thus pulls the trigger, teleporting its head away? What? I guess this was the plan all along. Only, damn it, a horrible worm-like ball of viscera emerges from the neck stump. And because Gantz bosses tend to have more phases than a World of Warcraft fight, transforms into this nightmare fuel. Is this the alien's true form? Is this a mutation due to Miyafuji? I don't know. Regardless, Kato gets absolutely pummeled again, and his suit finally breaks. But remembering his brother and wanting to avenge Kishimoto's death, he gathers his strength for one last strike. He reaches down and, at the last second, swings the sword with his remaining arm, decapitating the monster and finally killing it. Hell yes. Wait, what? As it dies, the creature runs him through with its tail, and Kato collapses. Far away, we see his brother wake up, go down to his horrible in-laws in evident distress before running out into the rainy Tokyo night. He reaches their new apartment but finds nobody there and begins to sob. Back in Nara, we see a presumably dead Kei and a dying Kato, desperately clinging to life as the rain begins to fall. But in the nick of time, the beaming begins. Oh man, what a fight that was. And now it's time for the scoring. Kei gasps and wakes up in the Gantz room, fully healed. It takes him a second to realize that he's alone. But wait, Kato's going to be beamed in soon, right? Right? Then the scoring begins. Kei has a mammoth 50 points, but desperately, hoping against hope, he asks Gantz to display the list of the deceased. And sure enough, we get confirmation. Kato is dead. Kishimoto is dead. Sei is dead. Hojo is dead. And Kato's little brother is left to his fate. The only survivor of Hunt 3 is Kei, who, crying, walks out into the rain, now completely and utterly alone. And yeah, I will give you my own confirmation here. This is real. Out of nowhere, we have just killed every single primary character besides Kei, in a sequence that this has to be inspired by the eclipse from Berserk, right? I don't know. Regardless, damn it, Oku, that was sad. That was like Bartholomew Kuma turning out to be RoboCop Terminator Jesus levels of sad. That's like Terry Pratchett's final tweet levels of sad. And yeah, thus ends the first arc of Gantz, giving us our final rule, at least for now. And I think that it's this rule, more than anything else, that makes Gantz so beloved to this day. Anyone, and I do mean anyone, can die at any moment. It is completely merciless, and I think that it's this, more than anything, that makes the fights in Gantz feel so good, as they are immediate and vital. The knowledge that, yeah, there are zero guarantees that anyone will survive any fight. We rejoin our unfortunate protagonist Kei, lying in bed. He is understandably massively traumatized and grieving his dead friends. Yeah, that was frigging rough. We also see something very interesting. The temple that was destroyed in the third hunt remained destroyed, and this has now become national news, with most people speculating about it being a terror incident. Now, I'm not going too far into this one today. Let's just say that the second act is going to be interesting to cover without getting demonetized. But let's say this much for now. In the times in which Gantz was written, terrorism was a gigantic fear in Japan. First due to the horrific gas attack on the Tokyo subway by the Aum cult, then by 9/11, and right before Gantz began publication, the now mostly forgotten but still terrifying Neo-Mugicha bus incident. This again will be quite heavily explored later in the manga. We see that Kei is genuinely struggling with the almost complete annihilation of their team. Just when he felt like he was getting his feet under him, he lost everyone. And this leads him to do something completely daft. He remembers that Kishimoto had a clone, due to the rare but still existent glitch that sometimes happens with the Gantz teleporters. Occasionally, rather than beaming someone away when they're dying, it'll duplicate them. He thus decides to track said clone down. Oh, dude, not a good idea. But this is interesting, as it's Oku quite cunningly reminding us that this glitch is a thing, almost as if this will eventually come into play in one of the story's most bizarre and infamous twists later on. Oh, and speaking of things that we're being reminded of here that'll be important later, one of Kei's loser-ass friends messages him about Megumi, a famous and astonishingly lovely pinup model. Yes, the one Kei was salivating over at the start of the manga. She was sighted in Shibuya, presumably to soon be eaten by a goldfish, and yes, now there is a shared universe theory for you. Regardless, Kei's meeting with Kishimoto goes about as well as you'd expect, with him clumsily revealing that he knows all kinds of stuff about her, and her quite logically concluding that he's a creepy stalker, and then running like hell. Dude, you're lucky she didn't call the cops on you. Yeesh. We see that Kei is dealing with his trauma by unfortunately regressing. He was going back to being his, well, better self, with Kato's guidance, and also I guess him needing to survive in Gantz, but now he's backsliding, heading into his apathetic, solipsistic previous life. Same loser friends, same teenage ennui, same bad attitude. We do, however, learn that his class will be getting a new student. Naturally, his little group hopes that it's a hot chick, but it's not. Instead it's, oh yeah, here we go. Meet Izumi. He's that character. One of the original hottie hot thirst traps for female readers, and I assume some gay readers too, alongside, I guess, Griffith, Sasuke, Byakuya, and possibly many more I'm forgetting. Tell me if this sounds familiar. He's tall, athletic, intelligent, thin, has long dark hair, delicate but still masculine features, and a rather aloof energy. Hell, even Kei cannot get over how good looking this chap is. Of course, if you've ever read a manga before, all sorts of alarm bells should be starting to sound. Kei finds himself kind of bowled over by Izumi, realizing that he reminds him of Kato, not only because of the immediate physical resemblance, but because of Izumi's natural athleticism and leadership qualities, with basically every girl in the school floating in their knickers whenever he passes by. Izumi is, in fact, immediately set up with the hottest girl in school, another newcomer that Kei had started to develop a bit of a crush on, once again, immediately feeling like the situation with Kato and Kishimoto. Somehow, Kato and Izumi are also quickly becoming mates, with Izumi revealing that, again, much like Kato, he's actually somewhat shy and not very comfortable with being popular, let alone the fact that he seems to have sex appeal stronger than Earth's gravity. Aside from this, Kei seems to be passing the time by doing nothing, and I guess baiting the Yankees from earlier. They've now found a professional boxer to sick on him, but he just takes the beating, with the suit protecting him, and they eventually give up in annoyed astonishment. However, Kei realizes that Izumi was watching all of it, and, to his surprise, Izumi asks him if he's heard of the room of the Black Sphere. Oh mate, be careful here, lest your head go kablooey. Wisely, Kei feigns ignorance, which seems to settle things, and then Izumi just invites himself over to lurk at Kei's place after school. Sure enough, back at the apartment, Izumi shows him a website. It's a blog of some kind, one that directly references Gantz, albeit as a work of fiction rather than a direct account. Kei reasons that this must have been Nishi's work. Also, real player? Yeah, this was the early 2000s for sure. Regardless, despite the pseudo-fictional nature of the blog, we see that Nishi had been trying to figure out what the purpose of the Gantz room was, but hadn't been able to come up with anything. Stranger still, Nishi's blog goes up until the end of the first hunt, naturally due to him dying a miserable death in Hunt 2, but he also calls out Kei by name, and for some reason this didn't get anyone killed, which is strange considering something that happens later, no spoilers. No, I don't think this is ever really explained outside of a cursory hand wave way later on. We do, however, learn that Kei has a brother, and this will become important later, but spoilers, it's going to be one of the many interesting seeming plot threads that goes exactly nowhere. Finally, even though he seems to mostly believe Kei, Izumi suddenly reveals that nope, he knows Gantz is real, and that Kei is likely wearing a suit, but as Kei, sweating bullets and likely expecting to go boom at any second, denies it again, Izumi basically tips him a wink and leaves. Kei tries to think, realizing that he is walking on some very thin ice here. Who exactly is Izumi? How the hell does he know about Gantz? Then, before he can even really begin to marshal his thoughts, Kei is horrified to see that the beaming has begun. And that, for now, will be the end. Act 2 will bring us the portions of Gantz that I think most readers will agree are the manga's high points, and it's also where things take kind of a huge turn, and, well, believe it or not, the story starts to get weird, but that will wait until next time. Anyways, before we finish for the day, I just want to give a huge, heartfelt owl thanks to our amazing patrons, without whom we legitimately could not continue making these videos. Cheshire Quill, Molly McEvoy, Mew Haku, John Knepp, Hunter Hexen, Adclear Andrew, Nate Corbin, Fluffy Burb, Camoleon, Endymion, Jake, Lance Goebel, The Empress, Simone, Squid, The Hedgehog Gamer, Rafferty, Hashtag Hermit, Yorgborg, William, Catstown, Oishipan, RJ Grendelsire, Erin Arnold, Callie Caris, Sallyface, Mootle, Mike, Ranger Danger, Rose Montgomery, Inukia Koji, Cal Core, Opinion Custard, Robert Dote, Wargle, Hunting for R2D2, Piece of Yeast, Eleanor, Crazy, Question Man 6, and Cheddar. I also want to give an even, extra special thanks to Jathis, Polite Crow, and Uto, our Owlbard patrons. Seriously, what can I even say here? That is amazingly generous. If you enjoyed this video, why not stick around? Like, subscribe, and all that good YouTube stuff. And if you fancy another good long video, Made in Abyss and Uzumaki are that away. If you want to help support this channel, feel free to check out channel memberships or our Patreon. All links, as always, are in the description. A subscription of any tier gives you access to early videos, some exclusive things, including something pretty big releasing on Halloween, and all sorts of Discord perks. If you fancy something different, Mrs. Owl's art commissions page is also linked in said description. Otherwise, cheers my friends, take care, and I will see you all next time. Until then, this is the Owl, signing off.